The champagne glass shattered against marble 3 feet from Arabella's hem, and in the half-second of crystalline silence that followed, she knew her life was over. Harold Locksley stood at the center of Lady Pemberton's ballroom with her most private letter clutched in his hand, the one she'd been fool enough to write, the one that made her sound reckless and desperate and dangerously improper. And his smile was a blade. "Gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the glittering room, "I present evidence of Miss Fairfax's true character, should any of you still doubt it." The letter began to unfold in his hands, and Arabella felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes like a physical blow. She had perhaps 10 seconds before he read it aloud, 10 seconds before every door in London slammed shut, 10 seconds before the word ruined attached itself to her name like a brand. Her sister's futures would die alongside her own. No respectable man would marry into a family touched by such scandal. Her father's hand tightened on her arm, not comfort, but warning. Don't run, don't speak, don't make it worse. But Harold's gaze found hers across the crowd, triumphant and hungry, and she understood with perfect cold clarity. He wasn't just destroying her reputation. He was making sure she had nowhere left to go but him. She'd seen this moment coming 3 days ago. Harold had been too solicitous at the Cavendish garden party, his attention too pointed, his questions about her family's finances too precise. She'd tried to warn her father that night, explained that Harold was positioning himself, that the letter he'd requested was likely a trap, but her father had dismissed her concerns as feminine hysteria. Men like Harold Locksley didn't need to scheme. They simply took what they wanted. Arabella had been wrong about many things in her life, but she was never wrong about predators. "My dearest Harold," he read now, his voice dripping false warmth, "I confess I cannot sleep for thinking of our last meeting, the things you said to me in the library." "That's enough." Her father's voice cut through the ballroom like a whip crack. "This is forgery, slander. I'll have my solicitor." "By all means, examine the handwriting, Lord Fairfax." Harold extended the letter with a gracious Florence. "I'm certain it will match your daughter's perfectly, as will the seal." Because it was her handwriting, her seal. What Harold had asked for in that library meeting was simple counsel about a legal matter. His words, not hers. She'd written back with professional courtesy, offering to connect him with her father's solicitor. Nothing improper, nothing that could be weaponized. Except Harold had doctored it, added sentences, changed context, turned business correspondence into apparent romantic confession, and she had no way to prove it. Arabella's mother made a small wounded sound beside her. Her sister Catherine had gone white as death. The marriage prospects they'd spent 5 years cultivating, the careful positioning, the modest dowries scraped together, the whisper campaigns about beauty and virtue, all of it was ash now. Harold tucked the letter back into his jacket. "Of course, Miss Fairfax, I bear you no ill will. Young ladies are often overcome by sentiment. If your family wishes to discuss a resolution in private, I am entirely at your disposal." The trap snapped shut. He would offer marriage. Her father would have no choice but to accept. And Arabella would spend the rest of her life as the possession of a man who'd proven he could rewrite reality itself and make everyone believe him. "We withdraw," her father said hoarsely, "immediately." The crowd parted like a sea as they moved toward the doors, not from respect, but from the desire to avoid contamination. Arabella kept her spine straight and her gaze forward, even as she heard the whispers beginning, even as Lady Pemberton's voice rose in shrill outrage about the scandal under her own roof. She'd failed, read the threat correctly, warned her father, tried to protect her family, and failed anyway. The Fairfax carriage clattered through London's dark streets in silence, broken only by her mother's quiet weeping. Catherine sat rigid beside Arabella, her hand cold where it gripped her sister's. Gas lamps flickered past the windows, casting wavering shadows across the carriage interior. "How could you be so stupid?" her father finally said. Arabella didn't answer. There was no point. He wouldn't believe her about the forgery, not when belief required admitting he'd ignored her warning, not when it was easier to blame his daughter's foolishness than his own blindness. "Harold will come tomorrow," her mother whispered, "with terms. Let him come." Her father's voice was hollow. "We have no position to negotiate from. The girl is ruined." But they did. Arabella's mind was already working, sorting through options the way she always did when panic tried to freeze her. Harold wanted control, wanted her grateful and desperate and bound to him by social necessity, which meant he expected capitulation. She wouldn't give it to him. "There are other options," Arabella said quietly. Her father's bark of laughter was bitter. "Marriage to a man who destroyed you publicly, or spinsterhood in disgrace while your sisters rot alongside you. Choose your poison, Arabella." "Neither." She kept her voice steady. "We have 48 hours before Harold makes a formal offer. If another proposal arrives first, who in God's name would propose to you now? Someone who didn't care about London scandal. Someone who needed something from a marriage more than he needed social approval. Someone desperate or ruthless or ambitious enough to see opportunity where others saw ruin." "I don't know yet," Arabella admitted, "but I'll find out." Catherine's hand tightened on hers, a pulse of desperate hope. Their father shook his head. "You're dreaming. No, gentlemen." The carriage lurched to a halt. Not at their townhouse. They were still 3 streets away. Her father leaned forward, irritation sharpening his voice. "Driver, what—" The carriage door opened. A man stood in the street outside, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in dark wool that looked expensive but unfashionable, cut for function rather than London style. Behind him, 2 other men waited beside a second carriage, their postures alert and military precise. The moment he stepped into the circle of lamplight, the air in the carriage changed. Arabella felt it like a physical thing, a shift in pressure, a sudden awareness prickling across her skin. Her breath caught before she could stop it, her pulse kicking hard against her throat. She didn't understand the reaction, didn't want it, but her body responded to his presence the way prey sensed a predator even before it moved. "Lord Fairfax." The man's voice was deep and carried the trace of a northern accent, rough velvet that slid under her skin in a way that made her spine stiffen. "I apologize for the inconvenience. I need 5 minutes of your time. This is outrageous. I don't know who you—" "Baron Ronan Alderwick." He said it like an afterthought, like titles bored him. "I've just arrived from Wraithmere. I understand your daughter is in need of a husband." The silence in the carriage was absolute. Arabella's heart kicked against her ribs, not relief, but the sharp recognition of a new game beginning. She studied the man in the doorway, late 30s, she guessed, hard-faced, gray eyes that didn't blink or waver or show anything resembling sympathy. Everything about him suggested controlled violence held on a very short leash. "How did you—" her father began. "I keep contacts in London society. Word of tonight's events reached me within the hour." Alderwick's gaze shifted to Arabella, and she felt the impact of it like cold water. "Miss Fairfax, I have a proposal that benefits both our situations. Your father's study, now, unless you'd prefer to wait for Locksley's offer tomorrow." He knew about Harold, knew the exact timing of the trap, had been watching, or having her watched, waiting for this precise moment of desperation. Arabella should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something sharp and bright flare in her chest, the wild hope of a different cage, a different gamble, a chance to choose her own poison. "Yes," she said, before her father could refuse. Alderwick's mouth didn't quite smile, but something flickered in those cold eyes. Approval, perhaps, or hunger. "Good. Follow me." Her father's study felt smaller with Alderwick in it. The gas lamps burned low along the walls, casting warm light across mahogany furniture and leather-bound books. But the ordinary comfort of the room evaporated the moment he crossed the threshold. He refused refreshment, refused a seat, stood instead near the window with his hands clasped behind his back, like a military commander assessing a battlefield. Arabella forced herself to breathe normally, to ignore the way her pulse jumped every time he moved. She'd faced worse than an intimidating stranger. She'd faced Harold's calculated cruelty. She could face this. But there was something about the way Alderwick occupied space, utterly still, utterly controlled, like violence at rest, that made the air feel charged, electric, wrong. "You need this marriage completed within 48 hours, he said without preamble. Before Locksley can make his move official, I have authority through the Archbishop's office to secure a special license by morning. In exchange for what? Arabella asked. Her father shot her a silencing look, but Alderwick's attention had already fixed on her, the full weight of that gray stare, and she felt heat crawl up her neck despite herself. Ridiculous. She was negotiating her future, not swooning like a debutante. You're the one asking questions. His voice carried something that might have been amusement. I'm the one being sold. I'd like to know the terms. Arabella, her mother breathed, horrified. But Alderwick's expression shifted, not quite approval, but something close to it. Interest, perhaps, the look of a man who'd expected sheep and found something with teeth instead. Fair enough. He turned fully toward her, and the movement had an odd, controlled grace to it, deliberate, contained, like he measured every gesture. I need a wife who can navigate society, manage a household, and keep her head in complicated situations. You need a husband who can provide safety, security, and distance from London. I'm offering all three. Why? Arabella kept her voice level, even as she became suddenly acutely aware of how small the study was. How the scent of him, winter air and something darker, wilder, seemed to fill the space. A northern baron with money enough for special licenses could find a wife without scandal attached. What do you gain? Arabella, you forget yourself, her father started. No. Alderwick's single word cut through the protest. His gaze hadn't left her face, and Arabella felt her skin prickle under the scrutiny, like he was reading something in her expression that she didn't mean to show. She's right to ask. I gain a wife who understands desperation, who won't ask questions she doesn't need answered, who will accept Raithmere's particular circumstances without hysteria. The pause before particular circumstances was deliberate. Warning or test, Arabella couldn't tell. What circumstances? She pressed, hating how her voice had gone slightly breathless. The room felt too warm, too close. Remote location, limited society, a town with complicated politics and old agreements that require a certain kind of discretion. He said it like a recitation, but his eyes never left hers. If you're expecting balls and morning calls, you'll be disappointed. If you're expecting a conventional marriage, likewise. And if I'm expecting honesty? Her mother made a strangled sound. Her father had gone very still. Alderwick smiled then, sharp and humorless, and Arabella's treacherous heart stuttered. She wanted to look away, couldn't. Hated herself for the weakness even as heat bloomed low in her belly. This was absurd. He was a stranger offering a cold transaction. Her body had no business reacting like, "Then you're wiser than I gave you credit for." He moved closer, just 2 steps, but suddenly the desk between them felt like no barrier at all. Here's honesty, Miss Fairfax. I need a wife for political reasons. You need a husband for survival reasons. I'm offering a transaction, not a romance. You'll be provided for, protected, and given autonomy within clear boundaries. In exchange, you'll fulfill certain public duties and ask no questions about Raithmere's governance. That's the offer. Take it or wait for Locksley. Transaction, not romance. The words should have stung. Instead, Arabella felt steadier, because transactions could be negotiated, and she was very good at negotiations, even if her hands were shaking. Even if every instinct screamed that this man was dangerous in ways Harold could never match. I want terms in writing, she said. Arabella. Her father's face had gone purple. You don't negotiate with, yes, she does. Alderwick pulled a folded document from his coat. I expected you would. My solicitor prepared this before I left Raithmere. He'd known she'd try to set terms, known she wouldn't simply accept rescue without conditions. The document was 3 pages of dense legal text. Arabella skimmed it quickly, her pulse jumping as she caught key phrases. Separate household accounts, correspondence with family permitted at regular intervals, right to refuse marital intimacy, dissolution clause after 5 years if both parties agree. It was shockingly generous, suspiciously generous. What aren't you telling me? She asked. Alderwick's smile widened a fraction. Several things, but you'll discover them when you arrive in Raithmere, not before. question is whether you trust yourself to survive whatever you find there. It wasn't a threat. It was an assessment. Arabella looked at the contract again, looked at her father's desperate face, her mother's tears, Catherine watching from the doorway with hope and terror warring in her expression. Harold would arrive tomorrow with his own contract, one that gave her no autonomy, no escape, no future except the one he designed. At least Alderwick was honest about his dishonesty. And at least when he looked at her, it didn't feel like ownership. It felt like evaluation, challenge, dangerous, whispered some rational part of her mind. This man is dangerous. But so was staying in London. I want one addition, Arabella said. My family's current debts paid in full within the month, and my sister's dowries secured in trust, untouchable by my father or future husbands. Her father made a choked sound. You have no right. Done, Alderwick said. The word fell like a hammer. Baron, this is highly irregular, her father tried. So is intercepting a man's carriage at midnight. Alderwick pulled out a pen, made a notation in the margin of the contract, initialed it. Miss Fairfax's terms are acceptable. The marriage takes place at St. George's at 10 tomorrow morning. A carriage will collect you at 9. He handed the contract to Arabella, and when their fingers brushed, she felt the contact like a spark. His eyes darkened fractionally. Sign it or don't. But decide now. Arabella looked at the paper in her hands, at the man who'd appeared out of nowhere with exactly the escape she needed at exactly the right moment. Who negotiated like he expected her to fight back? Who called her Miss Fairfax instead of my dear and offered autonomy instead of protection? Who made her pulse race and her skin flush and her rational mind scream warnings she was choosing to ignore? Who was lying about something, but at least respected her enough to let her know it? She signed her name in clear, steady script. Alderwick took the contract back, folded it precisely, tucked it away. Your maid should pack practical clothing. Wraithmere is cold, and we have a long journey north. How long? Arabella asked. 3 days by carriage. His gaze locked with hers. You'll have time to change your mind before we cross the boundary. After that, the choice is made. Understood? Understood. He nodded once, sharp, military, and turned toward the door. Baron Alderwick, Arabella said. He paused. What happens in 3 days, when we cross the boundary? For the first time, something almost human flickered across his expression. Not warmth, but something darker, more complicated. You'll understand what you've agreed to, he said quietly, and I'll find out if I've chosen well or chosen poorly. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, and Arabella was left standing in her father's study with a signed contract and the cold certainty that she'd just traded one trap for another. The room still felt charged with his presence. Her skin still prickled with unwanted awareness. She pressed her hand to her chest, willing her heartbeat to slow. The only question was which trap would kill her slower, and why part of her wanted to run toward the danger instead of away from it. The wedding was a grim affair. No guests beyond the immediate family and 2 witnesses Alderwick had brought, the same military-precise men from the night before. The clergyman spoke quickly, stumbling over the vows as if he sensed something wrong with the whole proceeding. Morning light filtered through St. George's stained glass windows, painting colored shadows across the stone floor. Arabella wore her mother's wedding dress, hastily altered. Alderwick wore the same dark wool from the night before. When the clergyman pronounced them man and wife, Alderwick's kiss was brief and cold, a formality, nothing more. The carriage is waiting, he said. No wedding breakfast, no celebration, just the immediate departure north, as if London itself might contaminate him if he stayed too long. Arabella embraced her mother and Catherine in silence. Her father shook Alderwick's hand with barely concealed relief. 1 daughter sacrificed, 2 saved, debts cleared. A good trade by any accounting. Be careful, Catherine whispered against Arabella's ear. Write to me. Promise. I promise. It was the only promise Arabella could make. The carriage rolled north through London streets, and Arabella watched the city disappear behind them, the only world she'd ever known, vanishing with each turn of the wheels. Alderwick sat across from her, silent, his gaze fixed on something outside the window. The silence stretched. Arabella became aware of small things. The sound of his breathing, steady and controlled. The way he held himself utterly still, like movement required permission he hadn't granted himself. The faint scent of winter air clinging to his coat. She looked away, frustrated with herself, with the awareness she couldn't shut off. "How long until we reach Wraithmere?" she asked finally. 3 days. We'll stop tonight at an inn I've arranged." "Separate rooms?" "Yes." He glanced at her then, and something in his expression gentled fractionally. "I told you, this is a transaction. I don't take what isn't offered. But you expect something." "I expect you to survive what comes next." His voice was flat. "The rest we'll figure out as we go." Arabella settled back against the seat, exhaustion finally catching up to her. She'd been awake for 36 hours, had survived a public scandal, negotiated a marriage contract, and signed away her entire future to a man she didn't know and couldn't read. And she still had 3 days before she understood what she'd truly agreed to. "Baron Alderwick," she said. "Ronan. We're married. Use my name. Ronan." The name felt strange on her tongue, intimate. "When we arrive in Wraithmere, when I understand the truth, will I still have the choice to leave?" The silence stretched too long. "No," he finally said. "Once you cross the boundary, you're bound to the treaty. There's no leaving after that." "Then I'm a prisoner." "You're protected." His gaze found hers in the dim carriage. "There's a difference." "Is there?" His smile was blade thin. "You'll have to decide that for yourself, Arabella. But I'd rather have you angry and alive than grateful and dead." The carriage rattled over rough road, throwing her forward. Ronan's hand shot out to steady her, strong fingers closing around her wrist with inhuman speed. For one suspended moment, she felt the heat of his palm, felt something electric and wrong, an utterly undeniable arc between them. Her breath caught. Her pulse jumped under his fingers, too fast, too revealing. His eyes went very dark. His fingers tightened fractionally. Then he released her as if burned, his hands fisting at his sides, and turned back to the window without another word. Arabella pressed her hand to her chest, willing her heartbeat to slow, trying to convince herself that the heat still prickling across her skin meant nothing. Outside, the city gave way to countryside. The sun climbed higher. And somewhere far to the north, Wraithmere waited, along with the truth about the man she'd just married, and the choice that was no longer hers to make. The inn where they stopped the first night was respectable but plain, a posting house on the north road with whitewashed walls and narrow stairs. Ronan arranged separate rooms without discussion, disappeared into his own before Arabella could ask any of the questions building in her chest. She lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the inn settling around her, footsteps in the corridor, voices from the tap room below, and once, very faintly, the sound of Ronan's door opening and closing, as if he couldn't sleep either. The second day passed in tense silence. They stopped only to change horses. Ronan's 2 men, Benedict and another whose name she hadn't learned, riding alongside the carriage like guards, or wardens. The landscape changed as they traveled north. Softer hills gave way to rocky moorland. Trees grew sparse and twisted. The air turned colder, sharp with the promise of early winter. On the 3rd morning, Arabella woke to find frost on the carriage windows. "We'll reach Wraithmere by nightfall," Ronan said when she emerged from her room. His gaze swept over her practical traveling dress, gray wool, no ornamentation, and something flickered in his expression. Approval, perhaps. "The road gets rough from here. Stay in the carriage no matter what you see." "What will I see?" "Wraithmere's boundaries." He turned away before she could press further. "Best you understand them from the beginning." They crossed into Wraithmere territory just as the sun began to set. Arabella felt the change before she saw it, a prickling awareness that raised the hair on her arms, a sense of being watched by things she couldn't see. The forest pressed close on either side of the road now, dark pines that seemed to absorb the fading light. Then she saw the first wolf. It stood at the tree line, utterly still, watching the carriage pass. Massive, far larger than any wolf she'd seen in menagerie illustrations. Gray-furred, with eyes that caught the last rays of sunlight and reflected them back like mirrors. Her breath stopped. "Don't look away," Ronan said quietly. They're testing you. Show fear, and they'll remember it. They? Arabella forced herself to keep her gaze steady on the wolf. How many are there? Enough. His voice carried a strange tone, not quite pride, not quite warning. This is pack territory, has been for 200 years. The treaty keeps human and wolf from each other's throats, but it's a fragile thing, built on old agreements and older grudges. The wolf at the tree line dipped its head, a gesture too deliberate, too aware to be animal instinct, and melted back into the shadows. Arabella's hands trembled in her lap. She laced her fingers together to still them. You brought me here knowing you'd be safer in Wraithmere than in London with Harold Locksley hunting you. Ronan's gaze was steady. Yes. Safe from one predator by offering me to others? His smile was blade thin. You're not being offered to anyone, Arabella. You're being protected by a treaty 2 centuries old. There's a difference. The carriage rounded a bend, and Wraithmere came into view. The town sat in a valley carved by a dark river, fog rising from the water like breath. Stone buildings clustered along the main road, a church with a weathered steeple, a physician's office, what looked like a public house. Ordinary enough, except for the way people stopped to watch the carriage pass, except for the shadows that moved too deliberately between buildings, except for the massive stone structure at the valley's center, half fortress, half assembly hall, with torches burning at its entrance despite the early hour. The Treaty Hall, Ronan said, where human and pack governance meet. You'll be presented there tonight. Presented? Arabella's stomach tightened. Like livestock at market. Like the Baron's wife and treaty collateral. He met her gaze evenly. I told you Wraithmere had particular circumstances. This is one of them. The carriage stopped outside a manor house that overlooked the valley, stone and timber, 3 stories with lights burning in the windows. Servants materialized to handle luggage. A housekeeper in severe black waited at the door. Mrs. Hewitt will show you to your rooms, Ronan said, handing Arabella down from the carriage. His fingers were warm through her glove, his grip steady. You have an hour to refresh yourself. Then we go to the hall. Ronan. An hour, Arabella, his voice gentled fractionally. I know you have questions. They'll be answered tonight, all of them. Then he was gone, striding toward the manor with Benedict at his heels, leaving Arabella standing in the courtyard with fog swirling around her ankles, and the housekeeper's sharp gaze assessing her worth. This way, ma'am, Mrs. Hewitt said. Not unkind, but not warm either. Best not keep the Baron waiting, not tonight. The room they'd given her was larger than her entire bedroom in London. A 4-poster bed with heavy curtains, a fireplace already lit, windows that overlooked the valley. Arabella washed her face with water from the basin, changed into her one good evening dress, tried to calm the hammering of her pulse. Treaty collateral. What did that mean? The knock came exactly 1 hour later. Ronan stood in the corridor, changed into formal black that made him look even more dangerous than usual. His gaze swept over her, thorough, assessing, and lingered a moment too long on the hollow of her throat. You look like a baroness, he said quietly. That's good. They need to see you as mine. I'm not. Tonight you are. He offered his arm. Stay close. Don't speak unless asked a direct question. And Arabella? His eyes met hers. Whatever you see in that hall, whatever you learn, don't run. There's nowhere to run to anymore. The Treaty Hall's interior was cavernous. Vaulted ceilings, stone floors, torches burning in iron sconces along the walls. 2 groups faced each other across a long table. On one side, severe-looking men and women in formal dress, unmistakably human. On the other side, Arabella's breath caught. They looked human, dressed like humans, sat like humans. But the way they held themselves, the way they breathed, the way their eyes tracked movement, not human at all. An old woman in black stood at the head of the table. Human, Arabella thought, but her gaze held the cold weight of someone who'd presided over too many funerals. Baron Alderwick, she said, you've brought the girl. My wife, Ronan corrected, his voice carrying command that made even the old woman pause. Lady Arabella Alderwick, as required by the collateral clause. She is not a bride. The old woman's voice echoed through the hall like a pronouncement of execution. She is a promise. The word fell like a stone into still water. Arabella stood frozen at Ronan's side, while 24 pairs of eyes studied her with the cold assessment of merchants evaluating livestock. Half the faces in the treaty hall were human, merchants, clergy, the severe widow who'd just spoken. The other half were not. And Arabella knew it the way prey knew a predator even before it moved. Something in the way they held themselves too still, breathed too quietly, watched her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with animal awareness. The collateral clause is clear, Ronan said, and his voice carried a command that made even the widow fall silent. Lady Arabella is under treaty protection as of 3 days ago. Any harm to her triggers war claims from both sides. Everyone in this room understands the stakes. His hand settled at the small of her back, possessive, deliberate, a claim made in front of witnesses. A man stood from the non-human side of the table, tall, dark-haired, with the same controlled stillness as Ronan. The stakes are understood, Alpha, but the collateral clause has additional requirements. Until the first full moon cycle is complete. I know the requirements, Benedict. Ronan's hand tightened fractionally against Arabella's back. The escort clause will be honored. The widow's gaze sharpened. Explain it to her then. Let her know what she's agreed to. Ronan turned slightly, his body angling toward Arabella in a way that felt protective despite everything. The treaty requires that collateral be guarded by the Alpha, by me, personally, until the first full moon cycle is completed. 28 days. During that time, you cannot be left unguarded. If harm comes to you, both sides can claim treaty violation and the peace collapses. So I'm a prisoner, Arabella said quietly. You're protected. His gray eyes held hers. And your leverage, the one thing both sides want preserved. Protection, the widow repeated softly. Or captivity, Baron Alderwick. Her gaze found Arabella's. You should know, girl, what you are to this town. You're the price of peace, the guarantee that keeps wolf and human from each other's throats. And if you disappear, if you're harmed, if you run, she smiled without warmth. War begins again, blood flows, good people die, all because of you. The words were designed to wound, to make Arabella feel the weight of responsibility she hadn't asked for, but she'd spent her whole life reading attacks disguised as concern. She knew manipulation when she heard it. Then I suppose, Arabella said carefully, everyone has a vested interest in keeping me alive and well. How fortunate for me. Silence. Then a low sound from the non-human side of the table. Not quite laughter, but close. Benedict's mouth curved fractionally. She's sharper than the last one. There was no last one, Ronan said, his voice gone cold. No. Benedict's smile vanished. There wasn't. Which is why this matters. A door at the back of the hall opened. A young man entered, human, dressed as a clerk, carrying a document case. He approached the table with nervous steps, cleared his throat. Apologies for the interruption, but there's been an incident at the Boundary Stones. Eastern Marker, He glanced at Arabella, hesitated. The evidence needs examination. What kind of incident? Ronan's voice was sharp. Looks like vandalism, sir, but the pattern is unusual. The widow stood. This council will examine it. Now. Agreed, said a man from the non-human side. Older, with silver threading his dark hair. If the boundary markers are being tampered with, I'll come, Ronan said. You cannot. The widow's voice was flat. The escort clause forbids it. You leave her side. The clause is broken. Choose, Baron, your wife or the treaty boundary. It was a trap. Arabella saw it clearly, forcing Ronan to either violate the escort clause or ignore a potential threat. Either choice could be weaponized. Then I'll examine it, Arabella said. Every gaze swung toward her. I beg your pardon? The widow's tone was ice. The escort clause requires Baron Alderwick to guard me. It doesn't forbid me from accompanying him to examine evidence. Arabella kept her voice steady despite the weight of all those eyes, unless the treaty specifically prohibits collateral from participating in governance. Benedict made that sound again, definitely laughter this time. The widow's expression soured. The treaty makes no such prohibition. Then we'll all go, Ronan said quietly. His hand remained steady at Arabella's back, warm through the fabric of her dress. Together. The boundary stone stood at the edge of the forest, carved with symbols Arabella didn't recognize. Old script, worn by weather and time. Torches had been lit around it, casting wavering light across the clearing. Someone had defaced it. Crude marks scratched across the ancient carvings, fresh enough that stone dust still littered the ground. Wolf marks, the widow said immediately. Pack aggression, a violation. No. Arabella stepped closer, studying the scratches. Look at the angle. These were made by someone right-handed, working from left to right. Wolves don't, she caught herself. Do they work that way? Silence. Then Ronan moved beside her, crouching to examine the marks more closely. No, they don't. A wolf in shifted form would tear downward, following the natural motion of the foreleg. This is human work. Impossible, the widow said. No human loyal to the treaty would risk it, Benedict corrected. He glanced at Ronan, but someone wants it to look like pack aggression. Arabella's mind was already working, sorting through implications the way she'd learned to read motives in London ballrooms. Who benefits from the appearance of pack violation? Anyone who wants the treaty broken, Ronan said quietly. His gaze met hers, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite approval, but recognition. Which narrows it to two groups: extremists on the human side who want wolves driven out, or rogues on the pack side who resent treaty restrictions. Or, Arabella said carefully, someone from outside Wraithmere entirely, someone who knows enough about the treaty to exploit it, but has no loyalty to either side. The widow's eyes narrowed. What are you implying, girl? I'm implying that this looks staged. Arabella gestured to the stone dust, still visible in the torchlight. Fresh damage, discovered conveniently during my first presentation at the hall, designed to create suspicion and force Baron Alderwick into an impossible choice. She met the widow's gaze steadily. I'm implying someone wanted chaos tonight. The question is who and why now? Benedict exchanged a glance with Ronan. She's not wrong. No, Ronan agreed. She's not. He stood, his attention shifting to the clerk who'd brought the news. Who reported this incident? The young man shifted nervously. A messenger, sir. Said he was passing through, saw the damage, thought we should know. Where is this messenger now? Gone, sir. Left right after delivering the report. Convenient, Benedict murmured. Arabella felt Ronan's hand return to her back, steady, grounding, as he addressed the gathered council members. We post guards at all boundary markers tonight. Benedict, organize patrol rotations. Mrs. Marrow. His tone went cold when addressing the widow. I trust you'll inform your network that jumping to conclusions about pack aggression serves no one. The widow's mouth thinned. And I trust you'll ensure your pack doesn't give us reason to jump to conclusions, Baron. My pack, Ronan said quietly, has kept this treaty for 200 years, including the 12 years I've led them. Question my control again, and we'll have a different conversation, in private. The threat was clear. The widow stepped back. They returned to the manor in tense silence. Arabella's mind spun with everything she'd learned. Wolves that shifted to human form, treaties built on collateral and blood, a town divided by species and suspicion. And Ronan, Baron Alderwick, her husband of 3 days, was alpha of the pack side, which meant he wasn't entirely human either, which meant the man whose hand still rested at her back, guiding her through the darkened manor halls, could become something else entirely. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt strangely steady, focused. She'd spotted the staged vandalism when no one else had. She'd asked the right questions. And Ronan had listened, not dismissed her, not silenced her, but listened. Your room, Ronan said, stopping outside her door. But he didn't move away, didn't drop his hand from her back. The corridor was narrow. Gas lamps burned low along the walls, casting dancing shadows across the wainscoting. They stood close enough that Arabella could feel the heat of him, could smell winter air and pine and something wilder underneath. You did well tonight, he said quietly, better than I expected. You expected me to collapse in hysteria. Despite everything, Arabella felt a flicker of irritation. Or simply to stand silent and decorative. His mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close. I expected you to be clever. You proved it in London. But cleverness under pressure, when surrounded by predators. He paused. That's rarer. I grew up in London society. I know predators. Not like these. His voice dropped lower, rougher. Not like me. The words hung between them, warning and confession both. Arabella should step back, open her door, put distance between herself and this man who was more than a man. Who'd bound her to a treaty she didn't understand. Who made her pulse race and her breath catch even as her rational mind screamed caution. Instead, she lifted her chin. You're right. Harold Locksley's predation was calculated and cold. Yours is? She searched for the word. Honest. You told me there would be secrets. You told me Wraithmere would be complicated. You didn't lie about the danger. No. Something flickered in his gray eyes. But I didn't tell you everything either. Then tell me now, Arabella held his gaze. What are you? What can you become? For a long moment, Ronan said nothing. His hand was still at her back, warm through her dress. She could feel the tension in him, the controlled stillness that suggested violence held on a very short leash. Wolf, he finally said. I'm a wolf shifter, alpha of the Wraithmere pack. And for the next 28 days, I'm bound to you by treaty law more surely than by any marriage vow. Your safety is my responsibility. Your life determines whether this town lives in peace or tears itself apart. His fingers tightened fractionally against her spine. So when I say you're protected, Arabella, understand what that means. I will break anyone who tries to harm you. Human or pack. Outsider or insider. Anyone. The words should have sounded possessive, controlling. Instead, they sounded like a vow. Even if I don't want your protection, Arabella asked quietly. Even then. His smile was sharp. But I think you're smart enough to want it. At least until you understand all the players in this game. He was right. She hated that he was right. The escort clause, she said. Does it mean you'll be, she gestured vaguely, constantly nearby? Yes. Same house, often same room, depending on the threat level. The treaty is specific about distance requirements. He watched her carefully. Does that frighten you? It should. But Arabella had spent 3 days in a carriage with this man, had stood beside him in a hall full of predators, had felt his hand steady at her back like an anchor. No, she admitted, but it complicates things. Everything about Wraithmere is complicated. Ronan stepped back finally, breaking contact. Get some rest. Tomorrow you'll meet the household staff and begin learning the manor's routines. The more normal things appear, the less fodder we give to people looking for cracks. Like Mrs. Marrow? Especially like Mrs. Marrow. His expression darkened. She lost her husband in the last treaty dispute 15 years ago. She's never forgiven the pack for his death, even though it was rogues who killed him, not my wolves. She sees you as a symbol, proof that humans must sacrifice to keep peace with monsters. And what do you see me as? The question escaped before Arabella could stop it. Ronan's gaze locked with hers. I see you as a woman smart enough to survive what's coming, and stubborn enough to make my life considerably more difficult in the process. Good, Arabella said. I'd hate to be predictable. His laugh was low, surprised. You're many things, Arabella. Predictable isn't one of them. Then he was moving down the corridor toward his own rooms, leaving her standing outside her door with her skin still prickling with awareness and her mind racing with impossible truths. Wolves, shifters, treaties and collateral, and a husband who could become something wild and dangerous. And somehow, despite everything, Arabella didn't feel trapped. She felt seen. The next 3 days established a routine. Arabella met the household staff, Mrs. Hewitt the housekeeper, Mr. Garris the groundskeeper, a handful of maids and footmen who watched her with wary curiosity. She learned the manor's layout, the rhythms of meals and household management, and she learned that Ronan's interpretation of the escort clause was ruthlessly literal. He was always nearby. Breakfast across the table from her, discussing pack business with Benedict, while she pretended not to listen. Afternoons in his study while she read in the adjacent sitting room, doors open between them. Evenings in the parlor, him working through correspondence, while she attempted needlework and failed spectacularly. "You're terrible at that," he observed on the third evening, watching her struggle with a hopelessly tangled thread. Firelight flickered across the parlor walls, shadows dancing with each pop and crackle from the hearth. "I'm aware," Arabella set down the hoop in defeat. "My governess despaired of ever making me properly domestic. What were you good at instead?" The question surprised her. Reading, mathematics, listening to conversations, and remembering every word. She glanced at him. "The skills that make women dangerous in London drawing rooms. Useful skills anywhere." Ronan set aside his pen. "Benedict needs help with the treaty archive tomorrow. Records going back 2 centuries, most of them disorganized. He's trying to trace historical precedents for boundary disputes." He paused. "Your memory and pattern recognition would be valuable." "It wasn't permission. It was an offer. A test. I thought the escort clause meant I stayed with you, not Benedict." "It does. I'll be there supervising." His mouth curved slightly. "But you're right that you're wasted on needlework. If you're going to be trapped in Wraithmere for the foreseeable future, you might as well be useful." Arabella should have been offended. Instead, she felt something bright and sharp flare in her chest. "When do we start?" The treaty archive was a disaster. 200 years of documents crammed into a stone room beneath the treaty hall. Handwritten agreements, addendums, witness statements, dispute resolutions. Some carefully preserved, others crumbling with age and neglect. Dust motes danced in the candlelight, thick enough that Arabella tasted it with each breath. The musty smell of old paper and leather bindings filled the air. "The last archivist died 8 years ago," Benedict explained, gesturing to the chaos. "No one's maintained proper order since. We need to cross-reference the collateral clause's historical applications, specifically how previous incidents at boundary markers were resolved." Arabella rolled up her sleeves, her fingers already ink-stained from handling the brittle documents. "Show me the filing system. Or what passes for one." By midday, she'd identified 3 separate organizational attempts, chronological, alphabetical by subject, and what appeared to be completely random. By late afternoon, she'd created a working index of collateral clause precedents spanning 1702 to 1798. And she'd found something strange. "Ronan," she called from her position on the floor, surrounded by documents. "Come look at this." He crossed the room, crouched beside her. This close, she could feel the heat of him, smell pine and winter air. Her treacherous pulse jumped. "Focus," she told herself firmly. "This boundary dispute from 1743, she said, pointing to faded script. The resolution required a public hearing with testimony from both sides. But look." She pulled out another document. Same type of incident in 1789. The resolution was completely different. Private mediation, no public testimony, sealed records. "Different circumstances," Benedict suggested. "Same circumstances," Arabella corrected. Both involved alleged pack aggression at eastern boundary markers. Both had human witnesses claiming wolf damage. Both occurred during periods of political tension in London that might have affected Northern Territories. She looked up at Ronan. But the 1789 resolution was handled quietly, almost like someone wanted to avoid public scrutiny. Ronan's expression had gone very still. "Show me the witness names, both incidents." Arabella traced the faded writing. 1743, Thomas Whitfield, Sarah Marsh, David Kersey. 1789, Agnes Whitfield, Margaret Marsh, Catherine Kersey. Family names, Benedict breathed. The same families, 46 years apart. The same families, Arabella confirmed, making the same accusations, which suggests either a long-standing grudge passed down through generations or a pattern of sabotage, Ronan finished quietly. Someone's been staging these incidents for centuries. The implications settled over the room like frost. "The vandalism we saw 3 nights ago," Arabella said carefully. "It matches the pattern. Eastern boundary marker, crude damage designed to look like pack aggression. Convenient timing. And Mrs. Marrow is a Whitfield by birth, Benedict added grimly. Married a Marrow, but the bloodline goes back. Ronan stood, his movements controlled but tense. This doesn't prove current involvement. Historical grudges don't damn the present generation. No, Arabella agreed. But it suggests where to look for current involvement. She pulled out the most recent documents. Who reported the vandalism we investigated? The messenger who conveniently disappeared. Did anyone get a description? Benedict's eyes widened. You think? I think someone wants to replicate the historical pattern. And I think they're counting on no one noticing because the archives are a disaster, and the precedents are buried under 2 centuries of neglect. Arabella met Ronan's gaze. But now we know what to look for. The silence stretched. Then Ronan's hand touched her shoulder, brief, warm, grounding. Well done. 2 words. But the approval in them made her chest tight. They emerged from the archives as the sun was setting, Arabella's dress dusty and her hair escaping its pins. She felt energized despite the physical exhaustion, the particular satisfaction of solving a puzzle no one else had seen. We need to watch the Whitfield Marsh-Kersey network, Benedict was saying as they crossed the town square. Quietly, if they're planning another incident. He stopped abruptly. Ronan went utterly still beside Arabella, his hand finding her elbow in an iron grip. Mrs. Marrow stood in the square with perhaps 20 others, all human, all holding torches despite the early hour. A crowd deliberately gathered, deliberately visible. Baron Alderwick, the widow called out. A word about the safety of this town and the compromises we're being asked to make. It wasn't a request. It was a public challenge. Ronan's fingers tightened fractionally on Arabella's arm. Not here, Mrs. Marrow. If you have treaty concerns, bring them to the council. The council protects pack interests over human safety. Mrs. Marrow's voice carried across the square. We have children in this town, Baron. Families. And we're expected to accept a stranger, a symbol, brought from London to keep wolves at bay? Her gaze found Arabella's. What happens when the symbol isn't enough? When the wolves decide they want more than promises? Arabella felt the weight of every eye on her, felt the fear and suspicion radiating from the gathered crowd. She could stay silent. Let Ronan handle it. Play the part of delicate London lady who needed protection. Or she could choose differently. Mrs. Marrow, Arabella said, her voice clear and steady. You're right that I'm a stranger here. I've been in Wraithmere less than a week, but I've already learned something important about this town. The widow's expression hardened. And what's that, girl? That peace requires trust on both sides, and that fear, justified or manufactured, is the enemy of both. Arabella stepped forward, Ronan's hand falling away from her arm. You lost your husband 15 years ago. That's a grief I cannot imagine. But using that grief to manufacture new fear, to sabotage the very treaty that might prevent other women from becoming widows. She held the woman's gaze. That's not protection. That's revenge. The square went silent. Mrs. Marrow's face went white, then red. You dare, I dare, Arabella said quietly, to ask what you really want. Peace? Or the satisfaction of watching this town tear itself apart because you cannot forgive what cannot be changed? For a long, terrible moment, the widow stared at her. Then she turned to her assembled supporters. You hear this? The pack's collateral accuses us of sabotage, while wolves prowl our streets and mark our boundaries. The boundary marking was human work, Ronan said, his voice cutting through the rising murmurs. We have evidence, and we have historical precedent showing that false accusations against the pack have been made before, by the same families now gathered behind you. Lies, someone in the crowd shouted. Proof, Benedict corrected, stepping forward with documents from the archive. 2 centuries of proof, available for examination by anyone who wants to see it. The crowd wavered. Some looked uncertain now, others angry. Mrs. Marrow's hands fisted at her sides. This isn't over, Baron. No, Ronan agreed quietly. But it ends peacefully, or it ends with consequences. Choose carefully which you prefer. The threat was clear. The widow turned and stalked away, her supporters scattering behind her. They made it halfway back to the manor before the howl split the air. long, mournful, full of warning, coming from the forest to the east. Ronan stopped dead. Benedict, take Arabella to the manor. Now. What is it? Arabella asked, even as her pulse spiked with instinctive fear. Rogue alert! Ronan was already moving toward the tree line. Eastern boundary, same area as the vandalism. The escort clause, Benedict started, is subordinate to immediate pack defense. Ronan's voice was hard. Get her to safety, I'll deal with this. No. Arabella grabbed his arm before he could leave. You said the escort clause was binding. You said my safety required. Your safety requires stopping a rogue incursion before it reaches the town. Ronan pulled free, his gray eyes gone cold and focused. This isn't negotiable, Arabella. Stay at the manor. Another howl, closer this time. Then answering howls from 3 different directions, pack members responding to the alert. Ronan, Benedict said urgently, if this is a setup, if someone's using a rogue scare to force treaty violation, then we deal with that after we ensure there are no actual rogues threatening civilians. Ronan's attention shifted back to Arabella. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? She should say no, should demand answers, should refuse to be left behind like a helpless ornament. But the howls were getting closer, and the look in Ronan's eyes was pure focused command. An alpha protecting his territory. Go, Arabella said. But come back, because we're not finished with this conversation. His smile was sharp and brief. I'm counting on it. Then he was gone, moving toward the forest with inhuman speed. Benedict got her as far as the manor's courtyard before the screaming started. Not howls, human screams, coming from the chapel at the town's edge. Inside, Benedict ordered, trying to steer Arabella toward the door. But she heard it again, a woman's voice high with terror. Then a child crying. There are people in that chapel, Arabella said, and Ronan gave orders. To keep me safe, not to let innocents die while I hide. Arabella pulled free from Benedict's grip. If rogues have reached the chapel, those people are already dead unless someone helps them. Are there other pack members nearby? Benedict's expression was torn. They've all responded to the Eastern alert. It's a coordinated attack. Draw pack forces away from the town. Then strike at civilian targets. Either hired rogues using the chaos Mrs. Marrow's creating, or opportunistic rogues who saw an opening. Exactly what Arabella had feared. A setup designed to make the pack look like they couldn't protect human civilians. Designed to shatter trust. Then we have to stop it ourselves, she said. We? Benedict's voice was flat. Lady Arabella, I appreciate your courage, but you're human, unshifted. Against rogues. Against rogues, you need someone they won't expect. Arabella's mind was racing. Someone who can get close enough to evacuate the chapel while you draw their attention. That's suicide. It's the only option that doesn't leave children to die while we debate. Arabella met his gaze. You said Ronan chose well. Prove it. Trust me. For a heartbeat, Benedict hesitated. Then he nodded sharply. Stay behind me. When I give the signal, you run for the chapel's side door. Get everyone out through the back route to the physician's office. Lock yourselves in and don't open the door for anyone except Ronan or me. Understood? Understood. They moved through the darkened streets, Benedict's body tense and ready. Arabella's heart hammered against her ribs, but her mind stayed clear, focused. This was like navigating a London ballroom full of social predators, except the stakes were literal life and death instead of mere reputation. The chapel came into view. The front doors hung open. Shadows moved inside. Too large, too wrong. Cold stone walls loomed against the night sky, altar candles guttering in the wind that swept through the violated sanctuary. Benedict made a low sound in his throat. 2 rogues, big ones. They're cornering the civilians against the altar. Can you take 2? Not easily, not without risking the civilians in the crossfire. He glanced at her. But I can give you a window. 30 seconds. Use it. What are you going to do? His smile was all teeth. Something incredibly stupid. On my signal. Then he shifted. Arabella had known it was possible, had seen wolves watching the carriage, had been told Ronan was a shifter. But knowing and seeing were entirely different things. Benedict's form blurred. bones reshaping with sounds that should have been painful, muscles flowing into new configuration. In less than 5 seconds, a man became a wolf, massive, dark-furred, with eyes that glowed amber in the darkness. The transformation was terrible and beautiful and utterly impossible. And Arabella didn't have time to process it, because Benedict was already moving, launching himself through the chapel doors with a snarl that shook the walls. Chaos erupted inside, roaring, snarling. The crash of wood splintering. Arabella ran. The side door was unlocked. She slipped inside, pressed herself against the wall. The chapel's interior was a nightmare of shadows and violence. Benedict locked in combat with 2 rogues, keeping them away from the cluster of terrified civilians huddled near the altar. This way, Arabella hissed, quickly, quietly. A woman looked up, young, with 2 children clinging to her skirts. Behind her, an elderly man and 3 others, all frozen with fear. "Move," Arabella ordered. "Out the back, to the physician's office. Now." The woman hesitated. "The wolves. That wolf is saving your life. Don't waste it." Arabella grabbed the nearest child's hand. "Follow me." Training took over, the same commanding tone she'd used to manage staff in London, to navigate social disasters, to maintain control when everything was falling apart. She led them out the back door, across the yard, through the narrow streets to the physician's office. Dr. Harrow opened the door immediately, pulled them inside. "Lock it," Arabella ordered. "Don't open it for anyone except—" The explosion of sound cut her off. More snarling, more howls, coming from everywhere now, and then cutting through the chaos, a roar that made the ground tremble. Alpha command, unmistakable. Arabella ran back toward the chapel without thinking. She had to see, had to know if— She stopped at the edge of the square. Ronan stood in the street outside the chapel in wolf form, and he was magnificent. Larger than any normal wolf, larger even than the rogues. Silver-gray fur that caught the moonlight, eyes that burned gold with power and fury. He moved like liquid violence, like something wild and terrible and utterly unstoppable. One of the rogues tried to run. Ronan caught it by the throat, slammed it to the ground with force that cracked cobblestones. Held it there, not killing, Arabella noticed. Not tearing out its throat. Just holding, with jaws that could snap bone, but didn't. Dominance. Control. Power without slaughter. The other rogue submitted immediately, belly to the ground, throat exposed. Benedict emerged from the chapel in human form now, naked and bloodied but alive. Chapel's clear, civilians evacuated. Ronan's head turned toward Arabella. Even in wolf form, even from 30 feet away, she felt the impact of that golden stare, felt him seeing her, assessing, recognizing, understanding that she hadn't stayed at the manor, that she'd risked herself to save people she didn't know. She should have been terrified. She should have run. Instead, Arabella stepped forward into the moonlight, into full view, and met the wolf's eyes without flinching. "I'm not afraid of you," she thought. "I'm not afraid of what you are." The air between them felt electric, charged, like the moment before lightning struck. Then Ronan shifted back to human, the transformation happening so fast Arabella barely registered the mechanics of it. And he was striding toward her in boots and torn clothing, his expression something between fury and relief. "I told you to stay at the manor," he said. "There were children in the chapel. There were rogues in the chapel. Which is why Benedict and I handled it." Arabella lifted her chin. "Everyone's safe. The rogues are subdued. The civilians are with Dr. Harrow. The trap failed. You could have been killed. I wasn't." She held his gaze. "And now everyone in this town knows that pack wolves protected human civilians, that the Alpha personally stopped the rogues, that the collateral didn't hide while innocent people died." Her voice softened fractionally. "This is how you build trust, Ronan. Not by keeping me locked away. By showing them we're all on the same side." The fury in his expression cracked. Something else showed through, something raw and complicated. "You're going to be the death of me," he said quietly. "Or the making of you." Arabella managed a shaky smile. "One or the other." His hand came up, cupped her face, warm palm against her cheek, thumb brushing her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. The touch was tender despite the violence still humming through his frame. "You saw," he said, not a question. "Yes." "And you're still standing here?" "Yes." Arabella's heart was hammering, but not from fear, from something else entirely, something that felt like recognition, like the final piece of a puzzle sliding into place. "I told you I'm not easily frightened." "No." His thumb traced her temple, just once, a ghost of a caress. "You're not." Then he dropped his hand and stepped back, the professional distance returning. "Benedict will escort you to the manor. I need to deal with the rogues and file incident reports. This was a coordinated attack. Someone sent them, or at the very least, someone created the conditions that made this attack possible." "Mrs. Marrow," Arabella said. "Possibly, or whoever's been staging the boundary incidents." Ronan's expression hardened. "Either way, they've escalated, which means we have to as well." He turned to leave. "Ronan," Arabella called. He paused. "Thank you. For trusting Benedict to protect me, for stopping the rogues without killing them, for—" She searched for words. "For being exactly what this town needs, even when they can't see it yet." Something flickered in his eyes. "Go to the manor, Arabella. We'll talk when I get back." It was a promise, not a dismissal. Benedict got her back to the manor in silence. At her door, he paused. "What you did tonight, evacuating the chapel, that was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish." "Can't it be both?" His mouth curved. "Yes." "Which makes you perfect for him, unfortunately." "I'm not perfect for anyone. This is a transaction." "Keep telling yourself that." Benedict's smile widened. "Maybe eventually you'll believe it." Then he was gone, leaving Arabella alone in her room with moonlight streaming through the windows and her whole body still humming with adrenaline. She'd seen Ronan shift, seen the wolf that lived under his skin, seen him take down rogues with controlled violence that should have been terrifying, and all she could think was how right it had looked, how perfectly he'd embodied the word alpha, protective and powerful and utterly in command. She washed the dust and fear from her skin, changed into her nightdress, tried to calm the hammering of her pulse. She didn't hear Ronan return, didn't hear his boots on the stairs or his door closing. But she heard the knock on her door an hour later, soft, questioning. Arabella opened it. Ronan stood in the corridor, still in the torn shirt and boots from the chapel, blood staining his sleeves. But his eyes were human again, gray instead of gold. "You should be resting," she said. "So should you." His gaze searched her face. "Are you all right? Truly?" "Yes." Shaken but unharmed. Arabella hesitated. "Are you?" "I'm fine. The rogues are confined, awaiting transport to Pack Justice. The civilians are all accounted for." He ran a hand through his hair. "It was a setup, exactly like you predicted. Draw Pack forces away, then strike at vulnerable targets to make us look ineffective. Did it work? No, because you turned it into proof of Pack protection instead of Pack failure." He smiled slightly. "You're a better strategist than you give yourself credit for." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "Can I ask you something?" Arabella said quietly. "Anything." "When you shifted back, when you looked at me in the square, what did you see?" Ronan was quiet for a long moment. "I saw you standing in moonlight, unafraid, looking at me like I was still me, even in wolf form. Like the shift didn't change what you saw when you looked at me." "It didn't," Arabella said honestly. "You were still you, just—" She searched for the right word. "More honest, maybe. More yourself." His expression shifted, softened. "No one's ever said that before." Then they weren't looking properly. The silence stretched between them, charged, electric, full of things neither of them was ready to say aloud. "I should let you rest," Ronan said finally. "Wait," Arabella touched his arm. "Stay, just for a few minutes. I don't—" She swallowed. "I don't want to be alone yet." It was the truth. After the fear and violence and impossible transformations, she wanted the steadying presence of someone who understood, someone who'd been there. Ronan's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "All right, but only if you're sure." "I'm sure." They sat in the chairs by her fireplace, properly separated, entirely decent. Nothing that would raise eyebrows. The fire crackled softly, sending shadows dancing across the walls. But the air between them felt intimate anyway, heavy with shared danger and mutual understanding. "Tell me about the shift," Arabella said. "What it feels like." "Terrifying," Ronan said quietly. "The first time, like being torn apart and remade, but also right. Like finding a part of yourself you didn't know was missing." "Does it hurt?" "Less each time. Now it's just—" He made a vague gesture. "Natural, like breathing." Arabella absorbed this. "And the wolf? Is it a separate consciousness or—" "Both? Neither?" He smiled slightly. "It's complicated. The wolf's instincts are stronger, more protective, more territorial. But it's still me making decisions. Still me choosing restraint over violence. Like tonight. You could have killed those rogues. Yes. But you didn't. No." His gaze held hers. "Because killing them would have proven Mrs. Marrow right. Would have made the pack look like the monsters she claims we are. Sometimes the strongest choice is restraint." Arabella felt something shift in her chest. This man, this alpha, carried enormous power and chose not to wield it brutally. Chose strategy and mercy over domination. "You're nothing like Harold," she said quietly. Ronan's expression darkened. "Good. If I ever resemble that bastard, put me down. I'm serious. Harold used power to control and diminish. You use power to protect and stabilize. There's a difference." "Is there?" Ronan's voice was rough. "I still brought you here without full disclosure. Still bound you to a treaty you didn't choose. Still made you collateral in a game you didn't ask to play." "Yes." Arabella held his gaze. "But you also negotiated a contract that gave me autonomy. Listened when I spoke. Valued my mind alongside your own. Harold would never have done any of that," she paused. "And when I saw you tonight as a wolf, when you looked at me, I didn't feel owned. I felt seen, protected. Chosen." The word chosen hung in the air between them. Ronan leaned forward slowly, giving her time to move away. His hand came up to cup her face again, warm, careful, trembling slightly. "You're dangerous," he said quietly. "You make me want things I have no right to want." "What things?" "Partnership, trust. Someone who sees the wolf and doesn't flinch." His thumb traced the line of her throat, lingering where her pulse hammered. "I brought you here as collateral, but you're becoming something else entirely." Arabella's breath caught. "What?" "Essential." The word fell like a confession. Then he stood abruptly, putting distance between them. "I should go, before I do something we'll both regret." "Ronan." "Good night, Arabella." His voice was strained. "Tomorrow we start investigating Mrs. Marrow's network. Together. As partners." He left before she could respond. Arabella sat alone in her room, her skin still burning where he'd touched her face and throat, her heart racing with something that felt like hope and terror combined. She'd been in Wraithmere less than a week. She'd seen impossible things, survived coordinated attacks, discovered she had value beyond her social standing or family connections, and she'd started falling for a man who could become a wolf and still chose gentleness over violence. This was supposed to be a transaction. But somewhere between London and Wraithmere, between treaty halls and rogue attacks, between fear and recognition, it had become something else, something real, and that was far more dangerous than any wolf could ever be. The morning after the chapel attack, Arabella woke to find Ronan already gone. A note sat on the tray Mrs. Hewitt had left outside her door. "Council meeting. Benedict will escort you to breakfast. Our professional, distant." As if he hadn't sat in her room last night and called her essential. As if his thumb hadn't traced her throat while his eyes promised things neither of them could afford. Arabella dressed quickly, ignoring the flutter in her chest. They had work to do. Mrs. Marrow's network needed investigating. The rogue attack proved someone was escalating, and sentiment in the town could shift like wind if they didn't act fast. She found Benedict in the dining room, looking exhausted but alert. "Ronan's trying to convince the council to authorize searches of properties owned by the Whitfield Marsh-Kersey families. They're resisting, claiming it's overreach." "Of course they are." Arabella accepted tea from a maid. Searching their homes would reveal the coordination. They can't allow it. Exactly what Ronan said. Benedict studied her with those two perceptive amber eyes. You two are starting to think alike. It's unnerving. Before Arabella could respond, the front door crashed open. Footsteps in the hall, raised voices. Mrs. Hewitt's protest cut short by a cultured accent that made Arabella's blood run cold. I don't care what your baron prefers. I'm here on behalf of Lady Arabella's family, and I will speak with her, now. Harold Locksley stepped into the dining room like he owned it. He looked exactly as he had in London, perfectly tailored coat, polished boots, that smile that never reached his eyes. But here, in Wraithmere's stone manor with morning light harsh through the windows, he looked wrong, out of place, a predator in the wrong hunting ground. Arabella. He said her name like a caress and a threat. You look well, surprisingly well, given the circumstances of your marriage. Benedict was on his feet instantly, placing himself between Harold and Arabella. You're trespassing. Leave. Now. I think not. Harold pulled papers from his coat. I have correspondence from Lord Fairfax, granting me authority to inquire into his daughter's welfare. Apparently, he's concerned about the hasty nature of this union and the unusual conditions of her residence here. My father sent you? Arabella's voice was steady, despite the ice spreading through her veins. I don't believe that. Believe what you like. Harold's smile widened. But I'm not leaving Wraithmere until I'm satisfied you're here of your own free will, given that you're being held under something called an escort clause that prevents you from leaving. He tilted his head. It does rather suggest captivity, doesn't it? How did he know about the escort clause? Arabella's mind raced. The terms of the treaty were supposed to be internal to Wraithmere, unless someone had told him, unless someone here was feeding information to London. I'm here by choice, Arabella said firmly, as my marriage contract clearly states. A contract signed under duress, after a scandal I'm prepared to testify was entirely fabricated. Harold's expression turned sympathetic in a way that made her skin crawl. Arabella, I know you were desperate. I know Alderwick took advantage of that desperation. But you don't have to stay trapped in this god-forsaken northern wilderness among... His gaze flicked to Benedict. Whatever these people are, he knew, or suspected. Either way, he was dangerous. Get out, Benedict growled. I think the Baron should make that determination himself, don't you? Harold settled into a chair uninvited. I'll wait. Ronan arrived within minutes, Benedict having sent a runner to the treaty hall. He filled the doorway like a storm, his gaze going immediately to Arabella, assessing, protective, before landing on Harold with lethal focus. You have 30 seconds to explain your presence in my home before I have you removed. Baron Alderwick, Harold stood, all false courtesy. Harold Locksley, solicitor representing the Fairfax family interests. I'm here to ensure Lady Arabella's welfare and to investigate certain irregularities in your marriage contract. There are no irregularities. The contract was witnessed and filed properly. Perhaps, but the circumstances surrounding it raise questions. Harold produced more papers. I have statements from 3 witnesses who saw you intercept Lord Fairfax's carriage the night of Arabella's scandal, who heard you offer a solution suspiciously quickly, almost as if you'd been waiting for such an opportunity. Arabella's stomach dropped. Because Harold wasn't wrong. Ronan had been watching, had admitted as much, had appeared with perfect timing and a pre-written contract. Your point? Ronan's voice was ice. My point is that a desperate young woman, socially ruined and facing an uncertain future, might agree to anything, including marriage to a northern baron about whom she knew nothing. Harold's gaze shifted to Arabella. Tell me, my dear, did you know about the treaty before you arrived? Did you know you'd be used as collateral? Did you know you'd be prevented from leaving? I knew enough, Arabella said, but the words felt hollow even to her. Did you know, Harold pressed, that the collateral clause includes a reassignment provision? That if you're deemed unfit or unsuitable, you can be handed over to another guardian designated by the Treaty Council. Mrs. Marrow has been most helpful in explaining your peculiar treaty arrangements. The room went utterly silent. Arabella's gaze snapped to Ronan. What is he talking about? Ronan's expression was carved from stone. There is a provision. It's never been used. But it exists, Harold said smoothly. Which means you're not actually protected, Arabella. You're controlled. And if this council decides you're more trouble than you're worth, if your actions threaten the precious peace, they can remove you from the Baron's custody and place you with someone else. Someone more compliant. Her hands were shaking. Arabella pressed them flat against the table. Ronan, is this true? Technically, yes, but... Technically, her voice cracked. You brought me here, bound me to a treaty that gives a council of strangers the power to reassign me like property, and you said nothing? Because it's never been invoked. Because I had no intention of allowing... Your intentions are irrelevant. Arabella stood, fury and betrayal warring in her chest. You said I had autonomy within clear boundaries. You negotiated a contract that promised me protection. And all along, there's a clause that makes me transferable, that makes my safety dependent on a council's whim. Arabella, Ronan started toward her. Don't, she stepped back. Don't touch me, don't, her breath was coming too fast. You're exactly like him, exactly like Harold. Different methods, same result. Control disguised as care. The words landed like blows. Ronan went white. I'm nothing like him. Aren't you? Arabella's voice shook. He destroyed my reputation to force my hand. You hid treaty clauses to force mine. He wanted to own me through social manipulation. You want to own me through legal manipulation. The cage is prettier, Ronan, but it's still a cage. Harold was smiling now, satisfied. I have rooms at the public house. When you're ready to leave, Arabella, I can arrange safe passage back to London. Your father is prepared to negotiate an annulment. You don't have to stay here. She's not going anywhere with you, Ronan growled. That's not your decision, Harold said mildly. According to the treaty terms you've just admitted exist, it's the council's decision, and I'm prepared to file a formal petition claiming she's being held against her will. Arabella looked between the two men, Harold with his poisonous sympathy, Ronan with his barely controlled fury, and felt something crack open inside her. They were both trying to control her, both using different tools to achieve the same end, both convinced they knew what was best, but neither of them had asked what she wanted. Get out, she said quietly. Harold's smile widened. Arabella, you don't have to. Both of you, get out of this room, now. Lady Arabella, Benedict said gently. You're upset. Perhaps I need 5 minutes without men telling me what I should think, feel, or do. She met Ronan's gaze. You want to protect me? Give me space. You want to prove you're different from Harold? Respect my choice when I ask you to leave. Ronan's hands fisted at his sides, every muscle tense, but he nodded once, sharp, military, and turned toward the door. This changes nothing about the escort clause, he said quietly. You're still under treaty protection, but I'll give you space to think. Harold moved to follow, but Arabella stopped him. Not you. You stay. Ronan paused in the doorway, dangerous and uncertain. It's all right, Arabella said, her voice steadier now. Benedict can stay as witness. I just need to make some things clear to Mr. Locksley, alone. After a long moment, Ronan left. The door closed. Arabella waited until his footsteps faded, then turned to Harold with cold precision. You made a mistake coming here, his smile faltered. Arabella, did you really think I wouldn't see through this? You don't represent my father. You represent yourself. She pulled the archived documents from her pocket, the ones she'd copied yesterday, showing the Whitfield Marsh-Kersey pattern. You've been corresponding with Mrs. Marrow, feeding her information about London, about me, about the treaty. Harold's expression went carefully blank. I have no idea what you're... The messenger who reported the boundary vandalism and then disappeared. I had Benedict track him. He was seen at the public house with a man matching your description 3 days before the incident. Arabella stepped closer. You sent him. You've been coordinating with the families who've been sabotaging the treaty for 200 years. The question is why? You're being paranoid. Am I? Arabella pulled out another document, the marriage contract Ronan had given her, with Harold's own law firm's seal on the witness page. Your firm has represented the Whitfield family for 60 years, which means you have financial interest in destabilizing this treaty, which means you orchestrated my London scandal specifically to get me to Wraithmere as a destabilizing force. She'd worked it out in the archives yesterday, tracing the legal connections. Had been planning to tell Ronan this morning. Harold's mask cracked. You can't prove any of this. I can prove enough. The archive documents showing your firm's involvement in past treaty disputes. The witness statement from the public house. The timeline of your arrival in Wraithmere. The same day as the rogue attack. Too convenient. Arabella smiled without warmth. You wanted me here to break the treaty from the inside. Thought you'd swoop in as my rescuer and expose Wraithmere's secrets to London authorities. Probably positioned yourself to profit from the resulting chaos. And what will you do with these theories? Harold's voice had gone cold, the charm stripped away. Tell your husband who lied to you about your own legal status. Tell a council that can reassign you on a whim? You're alone here, Arabella. Everyone in this god-forsaken town is either Pack or Pack sympathizer. No one will believe you. Then I'll make them believe. Arabella met his gaze steadily. You taught me something valuable, Harold. You taught me that the person who controls the narrative controls the outcome. And right now, you're a stranger in a hostile town, making accusations against a baron who just saves civilians from a rogue attack. While I'm the collateral everyone wants to protect. She walked to the door, opened it. Benedict, please escort Mr. Locksley to the public house and inform the council that I'm requesting an emergency session this afternoon. I have evidence of external interference in treaty matters. Harold stood, smoothing his coat. You're making a mistake. No, Arabella said quietly. I made a mistake in London when I trusted your request for correspondence. I made a mistake writing back. But I won't make the mistake of running from one cage straight into another. At least here, I have a chance to fight. You have nothing, no power, no... I have the truth. And I have a very protective alpha who will tear apart anyone who threatens his treaty. Arabella smiled. The question is whether you leave Wraithmere quietly on the evening train, or whether you'd like to discover exactly how far that protection extends. For the first time, Harold looked uncertain, threatened. Good. Benedict appeared in the doorway. This way, Mr. Locksley. Harold left without another word. Arabella waited until the front door closed, then let herself sag against the wall. Her hands were trembling, her heart raced. She'd just threatened Harold Locksley, the man who'd destroyed her London life, and somehow convinced him she had power she didn't quite possess. That was either brilliant or insane, Benedict said from the doorway. Both. Arabella straightened. I need to see Ronan, before the council session, before this gets worse. He's in his study, but Arabella? Benedict hesitated. You should know. The reassignment clause wasn't a secret he kept lightly. He fought the council when they insisted on including it 5 years ago. Lost. And he spent every day since ensuring it would never be used. Then why didn't he tell me? Because he's an idiot who thought he could protect you from ugly truths by hiding them. Benedict's smile was grim. He's alpha. Strategy and control are his defaults. Asking for help, admitting vulnerability, those require trust he hasn't given anyone in 15 years. Why 15 years? That's his story to tell, but consider that the last treaty dispute, the one that killed Mrs. Marrow's husband, happened under Ronan's watch, his first year as alpha, and he's carried that guilt ever since. The pieces clicked into place. Ronan's obsession with control, his fear that emotion made him sloppy. The way he looked when Benedict mentioned there was no last one, no previous collateral, because the treaty had nearly collapsed entirely. Arabella had been so focused on her own betrayal, she'd missed his. She found him in the study, standing at the window overlooking the valley. He didn't turn when she entered. I'm sorry, she said quietly. That made him turn. You're sorry, Arabella? I'm the one who... You're the one who hid a clause you knew would make me feel powerless. Yes. She crossed the room slowly. But I'm the one who compared you to Harold when you're nothing alike. He wielded his power to diminish me. You wielded yours to try protecting me, badly, but with good intentions. Intentions don't excuse... No, they don't. Arabella stopped a few feet away from him. But neither does my anger excuse me calling you a liar when you've been more honest with me than anyone in my life. You told me there would be secrets. You told me Wraithmere was complicated. You warned me about the danger and gave me the choice to leave before we crossed the boundary. A choice you wouldn't have made if you'd known about the reassignment clause. Maybe, maybe not. She held his gaze. But I know now, and I'm still here. Still choosing to fight beside you instead of running to London with Harold. Something flickered in his expression. Why? Because Harold wants me weak and grateful. The council wants me compliant and decorative. Mrs. Marrow wants me gone. And you... Her voice softened. You want me seen. Valued for my mind. Treated as a partner who can handle ugly truths, even when they're hard to hear. I should have told you about the clause. Yes, you should have. Arabella stepped closer. And I should have given you a chance to explain before I tore into you. We're both learning how to do this, how to be a partnership instead of a transaction. Ronan's hand came up, hovering near her face before dropping. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I'm not offering forgiveness, I'm offering a choice. Arabella met his gaze steadily. We can spend the next 24 hours mired in guilt and blame, while Harold and Mrs. Marrow burn this town down around us. Or we can focus on the actual enemy and save the emotional reckoning for after we've won. His mouth curved slightly. You're terrifyingly practical. I'm a survivor, there's a difference. She pulled out the documents showing Harold's connections. I know why he's here, I know what he's planning, and I have a strategy to turn it against him, but I need your help to execute it. Tell me. The council session was packed. Every seat filled, standing room crowded with townspeople eager to witness the drama. Gas lamps flickered along the stone walls, casting long shadows across the assembly. Mrs. Marrow sat at the head of the table with her supporters arrayed behind her. Harold lounged against the back wall, watching with predatory interest. Ronan and Arabella entered together, and the room went silent. This emergency session was called at Lady Arabella's request, Ronan said, his voice carrying command that made even the hostile faces quiet. She has evidence of external interference in treaty matters, evidence that affects all of us. Evidence provided by her London associate. Mrs. Marrow's voice dripped contempt. How convenient that Mr. Locksley arrives bearing accusations, and suddenly Lady Arabella has evidence to present. Actually, Arabella said, stepping forward, Mr. Locksley provided nothing but confirmation of what I'd already discovered. She laid the archived documents on the table. These show a pattern of sabotage spanning 2 centuries. The Whitfield Marsh-Kersey families have repeatedly staged incidents designed to make pack wolves look aggressive and uncontrollable. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Lies, someone shouted. Historical record, Benedict corrected, placing additional documents beside Arabella's. Witness statements, signed resolutions, all archived beneath this very hall. And what does ancient history matter to the present? Mrs. Marrow demanded. It matters, Arabella said quietly, because the same pattern is repeating. Eastern boundary vandalism designed to look like pack aggression. A rogue attack timed to make the pack look ineffective. And now a London solicitor arriving with suspiciously detailed knowledge of internal treaty clauses. She turned to face Harold directly. Mr. Locksley, how did you learn about the escort clause and the reassignment provision? The room went dead silent. Harold straightened, his expression carefully neutral. I have my sources. Name them. I'm under no obligation. You're under treaty law the moment you set foot in Wraithmere, making accusations about treaty collateral. Ronan's voice was steel. Either answer Lady Arabella's question, or be removed from this proceeding and this town. Harold's expression tightened. I received correspondence from concerned citizens here, people worried about an outsider's influence on delicate political balance. Show us the correspondence, Arabella said. I don't have it with me. Convenient. Arabella pulled out another document, the public house witness statement. But you do have connections to the messenger who reported the boundary vandalism. The same messenger who disappeared immediately after creating chaos. The same messenger seen meeting with you 3 days before the incident. Circumstantial, Mrs. Marrow said, but her voice wavered. Is it? Arabella turned to her. Your maiden name is Whitfield. Your family has been making these same accusations for 200 years. And now, a London solicitor whose firm represents your family arrives with perfect timing to exploit a crisis you helped create. That's not circumstantial. That's conspiracy. The crowd erupted, shouts from both sides. Mrs. Marrow on her feet, face red with rage. Harold moving toward the door. "Stop him," Ronan commanded. 2 pack members blocked Harold's exit. He turned back, cornered, all pretense of civility gone. "You think you've won?" Harold's smile was vicious. "You've proven nothing. And even if you had, the reassignment clause still exists. The council can still remove her from your custody, can still place her with someone more suitable, someone human." "The council can try," Ronan said quietly. "But they'll have to go through me to do it. And I don't lose fights over what's mine." "She's not yours," Harold spat. "She's a human woman being held captive by a treaty that protects both species," Arabella interrupted. "By laws older than either of us. By a system that works despite people like you trying to destroy it for profit." She stepped closer to Harold, ignoring Ronan's protective movement behind her. "You taught me to control the narrative, Harold. So here's the narrative. You orchestrated a scandal to trap me into a marriage that would destabilize Wraithmere. When that failed, when I chose to stay and fight, you followed north to finish what you started. But you underestimated 2 things. And what's that? That I would see through you, and that the people of Wraithmere, human and pack, would choose to believe me over you." She raised her voice to address the entire council. "I'm asking for a vote. Does this council believe external forces are attempting to sabotage the treaty? And if so, do we expel those forces and investigate their local connections?" For a long moment, no one moved. Then Dr. Harrow stood. "I vote for investigation. The lady's evidence is compelling." Another human counselor stood. "Agreed. Investigation." One by one, votes came, some reluctant, some firm. Even members of Mrs. Marrow's faction voted for investigation, unwilling to be seen defending an outsider. When it was over, the motion had passed by a significant margin. "Mr. Locksley," Ronan said, with quiet satisfaction, "you have until sunset to leave Wraithmere. If you're seen within treaty boundaries after that, you'll be arrested and held for trial on charges of conspiracy to break the peace." Harold's face twisted with rage. "This isn't over, Arabella. You think you're safe here? You're trapped. And when the reassignment clause eventually gets used, then I'll fight that too," Arabella said steadily. "But at least I'll be fighting for something real instead of running toward a prettier lie." Guards escorted Harold out. The crowd began to disperse, buzzing with shock and speculation. Mrs. Marrow remained seated, her expression unreadable. "You've made an enemy today, girl." "I made an enemy the day I arrived," Arabella corrected. "Today I just stopped pretending otherwise." The widow stood slowly. "This council session proved nothing except that you're clever with documents and good at swaying crowds. But the treaty is still fragile. You're still collateral. And one mistake, one moment of weakness, will give me the ammunition I need to see you removed." "Then I'll make sure not to give you that moment," Arabella said quietly. Mrs. Marrow left without another word. The sun was setting when Arabella finally escaped the manor. After the council session, there'd been hours of discussions. Benedict organizing investigations, Ronan managing pack security responses, counselors wanting reassurances. She'd smiled and nodded and played the part of grateful collateral until her face ached. Now she needed air, space, a moment to process everything that had happened. The widow's chapel circle sat at the edge of town, a ring of stones where women gathered for memorial services. Quiet, neutral ground, safe enough with the manor only a 10-minute walk away. Arabella wrapped her cloak around her shoulders and slipped out through the garden gate. Fog clung to the cobblestones, gaslit streets barely visible in the gathering dusk. She didn't see the shadow detach from the tree line until it was too late. A hand clamped over her mouth. Another arm wrapped around her waist, dragging her backward toward the forest. She tried to scream, but the sound was muffled. Tried to fight, but her attacker was strong, too strong. "Struggle and you'll make this worse," a male voice hissed against her ear. Not Harold. Not anyone she recognized. "Mrs. Marrow sends her regards." Terror spiked through her. This was it. The widow's response. The moment of weakness Mrs. Marrow had promised to exploit. Arabella went limp, making herself dead weight. Her attacker cursed, adjusted his grip, And in that split second of distraction, she slammed her head backward, connecting with his nose. He howled, his grip loosened. She ran, not toward the manor, too far, toward the chapel circle, toward the stones where her screams might carry, where someone might, her foot caught on a root. She went down hard, hands scraping against stone. The man was on her in seconds, fury in his eyes. "You little—" A snarl cut through the air. Ronan materialized out of the darkness, not in wolf form, but moving with inhuman speed. He caught Arabella's attacker by the throat, slammed him against a memorial stone hard enough to crack it. "Who sent you?" Ronan's voice was pure alpha command. The man spat blood. "Go to hell, shifter." "Wrong answer." Ronan's grip tightened. "I can smell Mrs. Marrow on you. Smell her house, her influence. Tell me what she promised you, or I start breaking bones until you do." "She said," the man choked. "She said if the collateral was injured, the council would have grounds for reassignment. Said she'd pay me enough to leave town after." Arabella's stomach turned. Mrs. Marrow had literally hired someone to hurt her, to create the exact scenario the widow needed to trigger the reassignment clause. "How many others?" Ronan demanded. "Just me, I swear." She wanted plausible deniability. Ronan released him, letting him drop to the ground. Benedict. The beta appeared from the shadows. He must have followed when he realized Arabella had left. "I'll take him to holding. Get him formally charged before dawn." As Benedict dragged the attacker away, Ronan turned to Arabella. His eyes were wild, his breathing harsh. "Are you hurt?" "Scraped hands. Nothing serious." Arabella tried to stand, found her legs shaking too badly to support her. Ronan caught her before she fell, lifting her against his chest like she weighed nothing. "I told you not to leave the manor without escort. I needed air, I needed—" Her voice broke. "I thought the chapel circle was safe. I thought—" "You thought Mrs. Marrow would fight fair." His arms tightened around her. "She won't, she can't. Because fair means you win, and she can't allow that." He carried her to the chapel itself, setting her down on one of the stone benches inside. Stained glass windows caught the candlelight from the altar, painting colored shadows across ancient stone. The space felt sacred, protected. Ronan knelt in front of her, taking her hands gently. "Let me see." Her palms were scraped raw, bleeding slightly. He examined them with careful fingers, his touch impossibly gentle for hands that had just threatened to break bones. "I'm sorry," Arabella whispered. His gaze snapped to hers. "For what?" "For leaving without telling you, for putting myself at risk, for—" The words caught in her throat. "For making you worry." "Of course I worried." His voice was rough. "Do you have any idea what I felt when Benedict came running to tell me you'd slipped out? What I felt imagining you alone and vulnerable while people like Mrs. Marrow plot against you?" "Ronan." "I felt terror, Arabella. Pure, primal terror that I wouldn't reach you in time. That I'd fail again, like I failed 15 years ago when the treaty collapsed and good people died because I wasn't strong enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't—" He broke off, his hands shaking where they held hers. "I can't lose you, I won't. Even if that makes me possessive and overprotective and exactly the kind of controlling bastard you accused me of being." "You're not," she said firmly. "Harold wanted to control me because he saw me as property. You want to protect me because—" She paused, searching his face. "Because why, Ronan?" "Because you matter." The words came out strangled. "Because in 1 week you've become essential to everything I'm trying to build here. Because when I look at you, I don't see collateral or treaty obligation or political necessity. I see you, the woman who spotted sabotage no one else noticed. Who faced down Mrs. Marrow in public. Who evacuated civilians while rogues attacked. Who makes me want to be better than I am." Arabella's breath caught. "Ronan, I know this started as a transaction. I know I brought you here for political reasons. But somewhere between London and Wraithmere, between treaty halls and chapel circles, between anger and trust." He lifted her scraped hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that was reverent and desperate. It stopped being a transaction, at least for me. The candlelight painted shadows across his face, highlighting the stark honesty in his expression. This man, this alpha who could become a wolf, who carried the weight of 200 years of treaty on his shoulders, who'd built walls around his heart for 15 years, was breaking those walls down for her. It stopped being a transaction for me too, Arabella admitted. I told myself it was survival, strategy, making the best of a bad situation. But that's not why I stayed when Harold offered me a way out. That's not why I fought beside you in that council session. Why did you? Because for the first time in my life, someone saw me as more than decorative or useful. You didn't want me to be smaller. You wanted me to be exactly who I am, sharp and stubborn and unwilling to be diminished. She cupped his face with her uninjured hand. You called me essential, but you're essential too, Ronan. To this town, to this treaty, to me. His eyes went very dark. Arabella, if you don't want this, if you need more time, I've had a week. I've seen you at your best and your worst. I've seen the wolf and the man. I've seen how you lead with strategy and protect with violence and choose mercy when killing would be easier. Her thumb traced his cheekbone. I've seen you, Ronan, and I'm not afraid. You should be. His voice was barely above a whisper. Because once I kiss you, I won't want to stop. Won't want to pretend this is still just duty and treaty obligation. Won't want to keep that careful distance we've been maintaining. Good. Arabella leaned forward slowly, giving him time to pull away. Because I'm tired of pretending too. The first brush of his lips against hers was gentle, questioning, reverent, like he was afraid she'd break. But when she made a soft sound of encouragement, something in him shifted, ignited. His hand came up to cradle the back of her head, fingers threading into her hair as he deepened the kiss. His other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer, not roughly, but with clear intent, claiming, choosing. Arabella's heart raced, her skin flushing hot despite the cool chapel air. She'd been kissed before, chaste, proper pecks from approved suitors in London gardens. But this was something else entirely. This was heat and hunger and barely restrained need. This was Ronan dropping every wall, every defense, showing her the depth of what he felt without words. She kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer even though they were already pressed together, tasting him, learning him, drowning in the sensation of finally letting herself have this. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ronan rested his forehead against hers. Tell me you meant it, he said roughly. Tell me this isn't just adrenaline or relief or... It's not, Arabella's voice was steady despite her racing pulse. This is me choosing you, choosing us, choosing to build something real instead of just surviving something hard. His thumb traced her bottom lip, tender, possessive. The reassignment clause still exists. Mrs. Marrow will still try to use it against you. Harold might come back with legal challenges. Nothing about this is going to be easy. I don't need easy. Arabella met his gaze. I need honest. I need partnership. I need you to trust that I can handle the ugly truths as long as you tell me about them. I can do that. He kissed her again, softer this time, sweeter. I'll try to do that. And I'll try to remember that protection doesn't always mean control. She smiled against his mouth. We'll learn together. Together, he agreed. They sat there in the candlelit chapel, wrapped around each other, the world outside temporarily forgotten. Tomorrow they'd have to face Mrs. Marrow's fury and the council's questions. Tomorrow they'd have to deal with the aftermath of Harold's expulsion and the investigations into sabotage. But tonight, in this sacred space with shadows dancing on stone walls, they were just Ronan and Arabella. No treaty, no collateral, no political necessity. Just two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and chosen to stay anyway. We should get back, Ronan said finally, though he made no move to release her. Before Benedict sends a search party. Probably wise. Arabella stood reluctantly, accepting his hand when her legs were still unsteady. And we should discuss strategy for tomorrow. Mrs. Marrow will retaliate for her hireling's arrest. Always thinking 3 moves ahead. Ronan smiled, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. This is why you're dangerous. Good dangerous or bad dangerous. The best kind. He kissed her once more, brief and heated, before stepping back. The kind that makes me want to tear apart anyone who threatens you while simultaneously trusting you to handle threats yourself. They walked back to the manor hand in hand, Arabella's scraped palms forgotten in the warmth of his grip. Benedict was waiting in the entrance hall, his expression knowing. Should I pretend I didn't notice you two were gone for an hour, or acknowledge it and make this awkward? Acknowledge it and make it awkward, Arabella said, before Ronan could answer. I'd hate for you to strain something holding back commentary. Benedict's smile was genuine. About time, the tension was quite evident to all. Was it that obvious? Arabella felt her cheeks heat. Remarkably so. Benedict turned to Ronan. The attacker's in holding. He's confessing readily now that he realizes Mrs. Marrow's not going to protect him. Gave us names of 3 other people she approached about handling the collateral problem. We've got enough for formal charges. Tomorrow, Ronan said. We file them tomorrow and force the council to take action. If we move tonight, she'll claim persecution. Agreed. Benedict hesitated. Also, there's been a development. Dr. Harrow found something in the medical records. Something about the last treaty collapse 15 years ago that doesn't match the official account. Ronan's expression shuddered. What kind of something? Better if he explains it himself. He's in your study. Arabella felt Ronan's hand tighten on hers. Whatever this was, it related to his guilt, to the failure he carried like a weight. I'm coming with you, she said quietly. Arabella, this is pack business. And I'm part of this pack now, by treaty and by choice. She squeezed his hand. Partnership, remember. That means facing hard things together. Something in his expression eased. All right, together. They sat in the chairs by her fireplace, properly separated, entirely decent. Nothing that would raise eyebrows. But the air between them felt intimate anyway, heavy with shared danger and mutual understanding. Dr. Harrow stood when they entered the study, his usually calm face troubled. Baron, Lady Arabella, I'm sorry to disturb you so late, but I found something in the archive medical records that I believe you need to see. The council sealed these records after the incident 15 years ago, but with the current sabotage investigation, I was granted access to verify historical patterns. He spread documents on the desk, patient records, witness statements, autopsy reports from 15 years ago. The official account says Mr. Marrow was killed by rogues during a border skirmish, Dr. Harrow said. That the pack responded too slowly and couldn't save him. That Alpha Ronan, newly appointed, made tactical errors that cost a civilian life. I know the official account, Ronan said tightly. I lived it. Except you didn't. Dr. Harrow tapped one of the documents. Look at the injury pattern. The wounds that killed Mr. Marrow were made by human weapons, knives specifically, not claws or teeth. The medical examiner noted it at the time but was overruled by the council who wanted a simpler narrative. Arabella leaned forward, studying the faded script. They covered it up, made it look like pack failure when it was actually human murder disguised as rogue attack. Dr. Harrow's voice was grim. Mr. Marrow was likely killed by extremists on the human side who wanted to break the treaty. They staged it to look like pack violence, knowing it would trigger outrage. Ronan had gone very still. 15 years I've carried that guilt. Thought I was too slow, too weak, too... You were lied to, Arabella said quietly. They used his death to control you, to make you so afraid of failure you'd never question their authority again. The widow knew, Ronan breathed. She must have known, must have... He stopped. She's been using her husband's death to maintain moral authority, to position herself as the voice of human victims. But if he was actually killed by humans... Her entire platform collapses, Benedict finished, and she goes from grieving widow to co-conspirator in a cover-up. Can we prove this? Arabella asked Dr. Harrow. The medical records are solid. Witness statements can be challenged, but the physical evidence doesn't lie. He gestured to another document. There's also this, a letter from Mr. Marrow written 2 days before his death. He'd discovered something about the Whitfield Marsh Kersey families, was planning to bring evidence to the council. He died before he could. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Mr. Marrow had stumbled onto the same sabotage pattern Arabella had found in the archives. had been killed to silence him, and the widow had either been part of the conspiracy or had been manipulated into believing the pack was responsible. "We take this to the council tomorrow," Ronan said, his voice hard. "Along with the charges against Mrs. Marrow for hiring tonight's attacker. We end this, all of it." "She won't go quietly," Benedict warned. "I'm counting on it." Ronan's smile was blade thin. "Because quiet wouldn't give us the public spectacle we need to break her hold on the human faction permanently." Arabella felt a chill run through her. This was Ronan in full alpha mode, strategic, ruthless, willing to do what was necessary to protect the treaty. To protect Wraithmere, to protect her. "What do you need from me?" she asked. His gaze softened fractionally. "I need you to testify about the archive discoveries tomorrow, about the historical pattern, about Harold's connection to the Sabotage families." He paused. "And I need you to survive whatever Mrs. Marrow throws at us when she realizes she's cornered." "I can do that." Arabella straightened her shoulders. "We've come this far. We finish it together," Ronan agreed. Dr. Harrow gathered his documents. "I'll prepare formal medical testimony for the council. This won't be pleasant, but it's necessary." After he left, Ronan pulled Arabella close, resting his chin on top of her head. She could feel the tension thrumming through him, rage and relief and determination all tangled together. 15 years, he said quietly. 15 years of thinking I failed him, failed the treaty, failed everyone. "You didn't fail." Arabella wrapped her arms around him. "You were betrayed. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes." She pulled back to look at him. "Failure is making a mistake through incompetence or weakness. Betrayal is other people lying to you and using that lie as a weapon. You didn't fail, Ronan. They used you." His arms tightened around her. "How are you always exactly what I need?" "Partnership," Arabella smiled. "I told you, we're better together than apart." They stood there in the quiet study, holding each other as the candles burned low and the manor settled around them. Tomorrow would bring confrontation and danger and the final push to break Mrs. Marrow's influence. But tonight they had this, had each other. Had the choice they'd made in that chapel to stop pretending and start building something real. And whatever tomorrow brought, they'd face it the way they'd faced everything else. Together. Act 4. The climax, the partnership, and the final choice. Dawn broke cold and clear over Wraithmere, fog lifting from the valley to reveal a town on edge. Word had spread about the charges being filed against Mrs. Marrow, about the medical evidence that challenged 15 years of accepted history. Arabella dressed carefully in her best day gown, deep blue wool that Catherine had helped her pack a lifetime ago in London. She pinned her hair with deliberate precision, willing her hands to stay steady. Today would decide everything. Mrs. Marrow cornered was more dangerous than Mrs. Marrow confident. And a widow who'd spent 15 years building influence on a foundation of lies wouldn't surrender without a fight. Ronan knocked softly before entering. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be." Arabella turned to face him. How angry will she be? Furious enough to make mistakes. He crossed to her, adjusting a pin that had gone crooked. The gesture was intimate, domestic. Which is exactly what we need. Anger makes people reckless. And recklessness reveals truth. Exactly. His hands settled on her shoulders. "Stay close to me during the session. If she tries anything." "I know. Trust you to handle it." Arabella covered his hands with hers. "But also trust me to see things you might miss. Partnership, remember?" His smile was quick and genuine. "I'm learning." Hook 1. 400 words. The charges. The council chamber was packed tighter than any session before. Every seat filled, people standing 3 deep along the walls. Gas lamps burned despite the morning light, illumination necessary in the stone hall's deep shadows. Mrs. Marrow sat at the center of the table, flanked by her remaining supporters. But Arabella noticed the space around her had grown, subtle gaps where allies used to sit, fear spreading like infection. "This session is called to order," Ronan announced, his voice carrying alpha command that silenced even the whispers. "We have formal charges to present against Agnes Marrow, widow, for conspiracy to violate treaty peace and attempted harm to treaty collateral. The crowd erupted. Mrs. Marrow shot to her feet, face white with rage. "This is persecution," she shouted. "Political theater designed to silence opposition to PAC overreach." "This is justice," Benedict corrected, stepping forward with documents. "We have signed confession from the man you hired to attack Lady Arabella. We have witness statements placing you at meetings with known treaty saboteurs. And we have medical evidence that your husband's death 15 years ago was not what you've claimed." The room went dead silent. Mrs. Marrow's expression flickered. Just for a moment, something like fear showed through. "My husband was killed by rogues. Everyone knows. Everyone knows a lie." Dr. Harrow stood, spreading autopsy records across the table. The wounds that killed Thomas Marrow were made by human weapons. Knives, specifically. The original medical examiner noted it. The council buried it. And you've spent 15 years using his death as a weapon against the very people who had nothing to do with it. "That's," Mrs. Marrow's voice cracked. "That's impossible. I saw the body. I identified." "You identified a man killed by humans and told it was PAC violence," Arabella said quietly, standing. "Because the real killers needed you to believe that lie. Needed your grief and rage to fuel anti-PAC sentiment. Needed you to be their unwitting weapon." The widow's hands were shaking. "You dare suggest I was manipulated? That I don't know my own husband's death? I suggest," Arabella said carefully, "that you were lied to, used, just like Baron Alderwick was made to carry false guilt for 15 years. The question is whether you were complicit in the lie or simply its victim." Hook 2, 800 words. Mrs. Marrow's play. For a long moment, Mrs. Marrow stood frozen. Then her expression hardened into something cold and calculating. "Very clever," she said softly. "Present me with a choice. Admit I was a fool manipulated for 15 years, or admit I was complicit in covering up my husband's real murder. Either way, I lose credibility." Her gaze swept the room. "But you've forgotten something important, Lady Arabella. I'm not the only one with secrets to protect." She pulled documents from her cloak, thick packets sealed with wax. "These are signed statements from 12 human families," Mrs. Marrow announced, "all documenting incidents of PAC intimidation, property damage, and threats over the past 5 years. All sworn before witnesses. All demonstrating a pattern of Alpha Alderwick using his position to suppress human opposition through fear." Benedict moved forward. "Those are fabrications. Are they?" Mrs. Marrow's smile was vicious. "Some might be exaggerated. Some might be misunderstandings. But some are absolutely true. Because maintaining peace requires showing strength. Requires making examples of those who threaten stability." She turned to Ronan. "Tell them, Baron. Tell them about the merchant you exiled for spreading anti-PAC rhetoric. The councilman you stripped of position for questioning treaty terms. The families you've pressured into silence over the years." The room had gone very quiet. Arabella felt Ronan tense beside her. Because Mrs. Marrow wasn't entirely wrong. An alpha maintaining order in a divided town would have to make hard choices. Would have to use power to prevent chaos. "I've made decisions," Ronan said carefully, "that balanced immediate harm against long-term stability. Every action Mrs. Marrow describes had context." "Context," the widow interrupted, "that you controlled. Context that you used to justify increasingly authoritarian control over human governance. And now you want to charge me with conspiracy while your own hands are stained with 15 years of suppression." She addressed the crowd now, her voice rising with practiced emotion. "Is this the treaty we want? Where PAC alphas hold all the power and humans exist only to be protected or punished at their whim?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the human faction. "Where collateral like Lady Arabella can be reassigned on a council vote," Mrs. Marrow pressed. "Where our children grow up knowing they're second-class citizens in their own town. Where questioning PAC authority means exile or ruin." The murmurs grew louder, angrier. Arabella saw the trap closing. Mrs. Marrow was gambling everything on one final play, turn the charges against her into charges against the entire power structure. Make this about human rights versus PAC dominance. Force the council to choose between prosecuting her and maintaining stability, and it was working. "The reassignment clause," Arabella said suddenly, her voice cutting through the rising noise. was written by this council 5 years ago, not by Baron Alderwick. He fought against its inclusion, lost, and has spent every day since ensuring it would never be used. Mrs. Marrow's expression flickered. How would you know? Because I asked. Arabella pulled out her own documents, the archived council minutes she'd found yesterday. The vote was 17-4 in favor of adding the reassignment clause. Baron Alderwick voted against, as did 3 human councillors who are no longer serving. She met the widow's gaze. Councillors who resigned under mysterious circumstances shortly after that vote. Circumstances you might want to explain, Mrs. Marrow. The widow went very still. You wanted that clause, Arabella continued, her voice steady and clear. Wanted the power to remove collateral who proved inconvenient to your plans. Wanted a weapon you could use against any future alpha who didn't bend to your influence. And when 3 councillors opposed you, they mysteriously resigned within the month. That's speculation, Mrs. Marrow said, but her voice had lost its certainty, its documented record. Arabella laid the minutes on the table, available for anyone to examine, just like the medical records, just like the historical sabotage pattern, just like every other truth you've tried to bury under grief and manipulation. The crowd was wavering now, some still angry, but others uncertain. Mrs. Marrow's hands fisted on the table. You think you've won? You think exposing old votes and medical records will make them forget 15 years of PAC intimidation? Will make them trust you, a London outsider who's been here barely a week? I think, Arabella said quietly, they'll trust the truth, eventually. Whether they trust me is irrelevant. Then you're a fool, Mrs. Marrow's smile turned deadly, because trust is all that holds this treaty together. And I'm about to show you exactly how fragile that trust really is. She turned and walked toward the doors. Stop her, Benedict started forward. But Mrs. Marrow was already gone, the doors slamming behind her. And outside, bells began to ring. Not the steady tolling of church bells, the sharp, frantic clanging of the alarm. Attack, breach, emergency, hook 3, 1,200 words, the riot. They burst from the treaty hall into chaos. The town square was packed with people, humans on one side, PAC members in human form on the other. And between them, Mrs. Marrow stood on the old merchant's platform, her voice carrying across the crowd. 15 years we've been told to trust the PAC. 15 years of watching our rights eroded, our voices silenced, our children taught to bow to wolves in human skin. She gestured wildly. And now they bring evidence, convenient evidence, that my husband was killed by humans, that I've been manipulated, that everything I know about his death is a lie. The human crowd roared approval. They want us to believe PAC wolves are innocent. Mrs. Marrow's voice cracked with emotion. Real or performed, Arabella couldn't tell. Want us to accept that the alpha who's ruled us with intimidation for 15 years is suddenly our protector. Want us to trust a London bride who's been here days over the word of those who've lived and bled for this town. This is bad, Benedict muttered beside Arabella. She's going to trigger a riot. She already has, Ronan said grimly. Look. The PAC members were shifting their stances, defensive, aggressive, preparing for violence. And on the human side, people were picking up stones. Makeshift weapons. The space between the two groups was shrinking. We have to stop this, Arabella said. How? Benedict's voice was tight. If Ronan tries to order them to disperse, it'll look like alpha dominance proving her point. If we do nothing, they'll tear each other apart. Arabella's mind raced. Mrs. Marrow had orchestrated this perfectly. Charges filed against her this morning. Medical evidence revealed. Her credibility destroyed. So she'd flipped the board, made herself the martyr, made the truth look like persecution. And she was counting on violence to prove her right. The boundary stones, Arabella said suddenly. She's going to send people to the eastern boundary. While everyone's focused on the square, she'll have supporters stage another incident. Make it look like the PAC can't maintain order even in crisis. Ronan's eyes widened. She's forcing us to choose. Stop the riot and leave the boundary vulnerable, or protect the boundary and let the square descend into violence. Unless we split forces, Benedict said. Half here, half there. which spreads us thin enough that both situations spiral, Arabella finished. It's the same trap as before, just bigger. On the platform, Mrs. Marrow was still speaking. They ask us to trust medical records sealed for 15 years. Trust a baron who's exiled our people for dissent. Trust a treaty that treats us as second-class citizens in our own town. The crowd was getting louder, angrier. Someone threw a stone. It clattered against the cobblestones near a pack member's feet. The wolf snarled, partially shifting, just teeth, just claws, and the humans surged forward. Ronan, Arabella said urgently, "You have to shift, now. If I shift here, in the square, it'll prove you're willing to show them what you are, to stand between them as alpha, not hide behind human form." She grabbed his arm. "And it'll give me the opening I need." "For what?" "To do what I do best." Arabella's smile was sharp. "Control the narrative." Understanding flickered in his eyes. "This is insane." "It's the only play we have." She squeezed his arm once. "Trust me." For a heartbeat, Ronan hesitated. Then he nodded. "Benedict, on my signal, get every pack member in defensive formation around the humans. Protect them even if they fight back." "That's..." Benedict stopped. "Brilliant, and possibly suicidal. Just do it." Ronan stepped forward into the square, into the space between the two groups. He unbuttoned his coat with deliberate slowness, his voice carrying alpha command that made even the shouting quiet. "Mrs. Marrow wants you to see what I am," he said, "so I'll show you." Then he shifted. Hook 4. Pakwetni 600 words. Shift number 2. The turning point. The transformation was terrible and beautiful. Bones reshaping, muscles flowing into new configuration, human form becoming massive silver-gray wolf in seconds. Larger than any natural animal. Eyes burning gold with alpha power. The crowd froze in shock and fear. Mrs. Marrow's triumph turned to uncertainty. This wasn't the script. The alpha was supposed to order compliance from human form, proving her point about dominance, not stand before them as wolf, vulnerable to their fear and hatred. Ronan's wolf form padded forward slowly, not aggressive, but deliberate, showing them his true nature, daring them to see him clearly. "Look at it," Mrs. Marrow's voice rose with desperation. "This is what rules us. This is what we're supposed to trust with our children's safety." But something was shifting in the crowd, because the massive wolf wasn't attacking, wasn't threatening, was simply standing there, between the two groups, a physical barrier to violence. Arabella stepped forward onto the platform beside Mrs. Marrow. "You're right," she said loudly. "That's what rules you, a wolf, an alpha, something powerful and dangerous and utterly unlike you." She turned to face the human crowd. "And for 15 years, that wolf has chosen not to use that power to destroy, has chosen mercy over slaughter, has chosen to protect a treaty that costs him politically and personally every single day." "He's a monster," someone shouted. "He's a shifter," Arabella corrected. "And yes, in that form, he could kill most of you before you could draw breath to scream. But he won't. Because the strongest choice isn't violence, it's restraint." She gestured to the pack members, who were forming up behind Ronan, not aggressive, but protective, creating a wall between the two groups. "Look at them. They could end this riot in minutes, could tear through human resistance like paper, but they're not. They're protecting you, even from yourselves." "Protecting us?" Mrs. Marrow's voice was shrill. "Or controlling us?" "Both," Arabella said simply. "Because that's what the treaty requires. Human and pack governance balancing each other. Each side holding power the other can't match. You have numbers, influence, control of trade and resources. They have strength, speed, and the ability to defend the boundaries against external threats. Neither side can survive without the other." She pulled out the final document, the one she'd prepared last night with Benedict's help. "This is a proposal to restructure the Treaty Council. Equal representation from human and pack sides. No reassignment clause. No unilateral alpha authority over civilian governance. A true partnership where both species have voice and power." Arabella met Mrs. Marrow's gaze. "It's what your husband was trying to propose 15 years ago, before he was killed for it. It's what the families who murdered him have spent 2 centuries trying to prevent." and it's what you could have fought for, if you'd chosen truth over revenge. The widow's face crumpled. You can't possibly know what Thomas wanted. I read his letter, the one he wrote 2 days before his death. Arabella's voice gentled. He loved you, loved this town, and he died trying to make it better. You could honor that, or you can keep using his death as a weapon until there's nothing left worth protecting. For a long moment, Mrs. Marrow stood frozen. The square had gone utterly silent, the crowd waiting. Then the widow's shoulders sagged. He did want reform, she whispered. Wanted human voices to matter more. Wanted... Her voice broke. I thought the pack killed him for that. Thought they silenced him to maintain control. The pack tried to save him, Ronan said, and Arabella realized he'd shifted back to human form. Standing now in torn clothes with Benedict's coat thrown over his shoulders. I was barely a month into being alpha. Barely knew what I was doing. But I sent every wolf I could to that border when we heard about the attack. We were too late. And for 15 years, I've carried the guilt of that failure. It wasn't failure, Dr. Harrow called from the crowd. The medical evidence is clear. He was dead before you reached him, killed by humans who wanted the treaty to collapse. Mrs. Marrow's face twisted with anguish. Who? Who killed him? Extremists from the same families who've sabotaged the treaty for generations, Arabella said quietly. We're still investigating, but we'll find them, and they'll face justice. Justice, the widow repeated hollowly. 15 years too late. Justice for the future, Arabella corrected. So no one else spends 15 years living a lie. The crowd was dispersing now, slowly, warily, but dispersing. The immediate threat of violence fading as shock and confusion replaced rage. Benedict appeared at Ronan's side. The eastern boundary. I sent wolves to secure it when the riot started. They found evidence of a staged attack being prepared. Accelerants, fake wolf tracks, human blood stored in vials. Whoever Mrs. Marrow had coordinating the boundary incident fled when they realized we'd anticipated it. Arabella felt her knees go weak with relief. It had worked. Mrs. Marrow's final gambit had failed because they'd read it correctly, anticipated her moves, and turned her own tactics against her. What happens to me now? The widow asked quietly. I hired someone to hurt the collateral. That's grounds for exile, Ronan said. Under normal circumstances. But these aren't normal circumstances. He glanced at Arabella. What do you think? She realized he was genuinely asking, giving her voice in the decision. I think, Arabella said carefully, that Mrs. Marrow has been a weapon in someone else's hands. And I think she might choose to be something different, given the chance. She met the widow's gaze. Your husband wanted reform. Help us build it. Use your influence to support the new treaty structure instead of tearing down the old one. You'd trust me, Mrs. Marrow's voice was raw. After everything I've done, I'd give you a choice, Arabella corrected. The same choice I was given, to build something better or destroy yourself fighting the inevitable. Hook 5. Over 2,000 words. Ronan's sacrifice. The offer. The council reconvened that evening in a quieter, more somber mood. Mrs. Marrow sat not at the head of the table, but in the witness section, stripped of authority, but present. The proposed treaty restructure requires approval from both sides, Ronan said, standing. I'm prepared to support it, but it requires significant concessions from PAC leadership. What kind of concessions? An elder asked. I'll be ceding veto power over civilian governance, accepting equal human representation on all major decisions, and... He paused, his gaze finding Arabella's. Formally abolishing the reassignment clause, and granting Lady Arabella permanent status as treaty co-architect rather than collateral. The room erupted in shock. That's absurd, someone sputtered. She's been here barely a week, and has done more to stabilize this treaty than most of us have in years, Benedict interrupted. She spotted sabotage we'd missed, connected historical patterns no one else saw, turned a riot into a reformation. If anyone's earned a permanent voice, it's her. But the power implications, another counselor protested. If collateral can become co-architects, then future alphas will have to choose their partners more carefully, Ronan said flatly. And the treaty becomes something built together rather than enforced from above. That's the point. He pulled out a formal document, laying it on the table. This amendment abolishes the collateral system entirely. Future partnerships between human and pack leadership will be negotiated as equals, not purchases or political necessities. His voice was steady, but Arabella could see the cost in his expression. It means giving up significant alpha authority, means sharing power I've held exclusively for 15 years, means trusting humans to govern alongside pack rather than beneath us. Why? The question came from Dr. Harrow. Why give up so much? Ronan's gaze found Arabella's again. Because she was right. The strongest choice isn't power, it's partnership. And I'd rather build something lasting with someone I trust than rule alone from a position I maintain through fear. The vote was closer than Arabella expected, 12-9 in favor. But it passed. As the council dispersed, Ronan found her in the corridor outside. Walk with me? They ended up in the manor gardens, evening stars bright overhead, gas lamps along the paths casting pools of warm light. You gave up a lot today, Arabella said quietly. I gave up control I should never have held exclusively. Ronan stopped beside the fountain, steam rising from its heated basin. And I gained something more valuable. What? A partner who'll challenge me when I'm wrong, who'll see solutions I'd miss, who makes me better than I am alone. He turned to face her fully. The treaty co-architect position is real, Arabella. Equal voice in all governance decisions, permanent seat on the council, authority to propose reforms and negotiate between factions. It's not symbolic, it's actual power. I know. Arabella's heart was racing. That's what scares me. Why? Because it means choosing Wraithmere permanently, choosing this life over any chance of returning to London. Choosing to build something here instead of just surviving until I could leave. She met his gaze. Choosing you, openly, completely. No more pretending this is just treaty obligation. Is that what you want? His voice was rough. Because I need to know, Arabella. I need to know if you're staying because you want to, or because you think you don't have other options. Because I can arrange passage back to London, can negotiate an annulment if that's what you need. You're not trapped anymore. I know, Arabella stepped closer. That's why I'm staying. Not because I'm trapped. Because I choose this. Choose you. Choose building something real instead of running back to a life that was killing me slowly in different ways. His hands came up to cup her face, gentle, reverent. I love you. The words fell between them like stones into still water. Simple, true, devastating. I know you might not, Ronan started. I love you too, Arabella interrupted. I've been terrified to admit it. Kept telling myself it was just gratitude or attraction or the intensity of everything we've been through. But it's not, it's love. Messy and complicated and nothing like what I imagined, but real. He kissed her then, deep and claiming and full of everything they'd held back for weeks. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him, her hands fisted in his shirt, holding on like he might disappear if she let go. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Arabella laughed shakily. We should probably go inside, before we scandalize the household staff. Probably. But Ronan made no move to release her. Although as co-architect of the treaty, you have certain privileges, including private quarters, and the right to determine who visits them. Are you propositioning me, Baron Alderwick? I'm offering you a choice, Lady Arabella. His smile was wicked. As I always do. Then I choose you. She pulled him toward the manor. Now, tonight, tomorrow, for however long this lasts. Forever, if I have any say in it. Partnership, Arabella reminded him, which means you get equal say, not final say. His laugh was low and warm. I'm learning. Hook 6. 2,400 words. Resolution. They made it as far as Arabella's sitting room before restraint shattered completely. Ronan backed her against the closed door, his mouth on hers, hot and demanding. His hands spanned her waist, thumbs stroking the sensitive skin just below her ribs through the fabric of her gown. Arabella gasped against his mouth, her pulse hammering. There's probably. Mrs. Hewitt knows to give us privacy, Ronan murmured against her throat. Benedict made sure the staff understood. No interruptions unless the town's literally burning down. Very presumptuous of you both. Very practical. He kissed his way down her neck, teeth grazing her pulse point. I've wanted you since London. Since you negotiated that contract like you were born to command boardrooms. Since you walked into a treaty hall full of predators and didn't flinch. I was terrified, Arabella admitted. You were magnificent. His hands moved to the buttons of her gown, fingers deft despite the trembling she could feel. May I? The question, formal, careful, made her chest tight. Even now, even after everything he asked, gave her choice. Yes, she breathed. Yes, please. The gown fell away in whispers of fabric. Then the corset, unlaced with surprising skill. Then the chemise, until she stood in just stockings and slippers, firelight painting her skin gold. Ronan stepped back, his gaze raking over her with heat that made her shiver. Beautiful, he said quietly. I knew you would be, but knowing and seeing, he shook his head. You're going to destroy me, Arabella. Good. She reached for his shirt, tugging it free. I'd hate to be the only one undone. His clothes joined hers in a pile by the door. Then he was lifting her, carrying her to the bed, laying her down on cool sheets like she was something precious. Last chance to change your mind, he said, braced above her. I don't want to change my mind. Arabella pulled him down. I want you, now. What happened next was heat and urgency and the particular intimacy of two people finally letting down every guard. Ronan's hands everywhere, gentle and demanding by turns. Arabella's breathless sounds of pleasure echoing off the walls. The overwhelming rightness of choosing this, choosing him, choosing pleasure without shame or apology. When it was over, they lay tangled together, hearts racing, breath slowly steadying. That was, Arabella started. Perfect, Ronan finished. That was perfect. He pressed a kiss to her temple. You're perfect. I'm really not. You are to me. He pulled her closer. My co-architect, my partner, my wife, Arabella suggested. Since we are actually married. I was going to say love, but wife works too. His smile was soft against her hair. Though we should probably have a proper ceremony at some point. One where you're not being coerced by scandal and desperation. I wasn't coerced, Arabella corrected. I was making the best choice available, and I'd make it again. Exactly the same way. They lay there in comfortable silence, firelight dancing across the walls, the manor settling into nighttime quiet around them. What happens now? Arabella asked eventually. Now we rebuild, implement the treaty restructure, investigate the families behind the sabotage, make sure no one else gets used the way Mrs. Marrow was used. Ronan's fingers traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. And we do it together. As partners. I don't know the first thing about treaty architecture. You'll learn, I'll teach you. He shifted to look at her properly. And you'll teach me how to share power without seeing it as weakness. How to trust that partnership makes us stronger, not more vulnerable. That sounds exhausting. Probably. His smile was crooked. But also worthwhile. The best things usually are. Arabella nestled closer, breathing in the scent of him, pine and winter air, and something uniquely Ronan. I never thought this was how my life would turn out. Exiled from London, married to an alpha, helping govern a town I'd never heard of until 2 weeks ago. Regrets? Not even one. She kissed him softly. This is better than anything I'd planned for myself. Harder, scarier, but better. Good. He pulled the blankets over them both. Because you're stuck with me now. Co-architect positions are for life. Is that a threat or a promise? Both. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, guards down, walls demolished. Two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and chosen to build something beautiful anyway. Epilogue. 3 months later, the Reformed Treaty Council met for the first time under the new structure. Arabella sat at the table as official co-architect, her voice equal to Ronan's in all governance matters. Around them, human and pack counselors worked through the complicated business of shared power with varying degrees of grace. Mrs. Marrow attended as well, not as a counselor, but as historical consultant. Her knowledge of the families who'd sabotaged the treaty for generations had proved invaluable in rooting out remaining conspirators. The Whitfield property searches turned up correspondence going back 60 years, Benedict reported. We have enough evidence now to bring formal charges, though most of the actual perpetrators are long dead. Bring charges against the estates, Arabella suggested. Force restitution to go into a treaty peace fund. Make the families pay for the damage their ancestors caused. That's one of the human counselors paused. Actually, quite clever. Hits them financially without requiring impossible prosecutions. Lady Arabella's specialty, Ronan said, his voice warm with pride. Finding third options when everyone else sees only two choices. The meeting continued for another hour, working through boundary patrol schedules, trade negotiations, and a proposal to establish a joint human pack school. When it finally adjourned, Arabella gathered her documents, already mentally planning her next project. A comprehensive archive reorganization that would prevent future sabotage from hiding in neglected records. Ronan caught her hand as they left the hall. Dinner? I have work, she started. So do I, but we also have to eat. He pulled her close, ignoring the knowing looks from passing counselors. And I'd prefer to eat with my wife, rather than across a desk from my co-architect. Those are the same person. Exactly my point. He kissed her, brief and public and utterly unashamed. Come home, Arabella. Work can wait an hour. She pretended to consider it. Will there be wine? The good bottle from France. Benedict procured it specifically for celebrating your first 3-month tenure as co-architect. In that case, Arabella linked her arm through his. Home sounds perfect. They walked through Rathmere's streets as twilight fell, gas lamps flickering to life along the roads. Humans and pack members moved about their evening business, not without tension, but without violence, building something fragile and imperfect and worth protecting. And somewhere between the treaty hall and the manor, between duty and desire, between what she'd been forced into and what she'd chosen to become, Arabella Fairfax Alderwick found herself genuinely, impossibly happy. Not because the danger was gone, it would never be entirely gone. Not because the problems were solved, they'd be solving problems for years. But because she'd found something worth fighting for, someone worth building with, a purpose that demanded everything she had to give and never made her feel small for giving it. She'd come to Rathmere as collateral, a transaction, a political necessity. She'd stayed as a partner, a co-architect, a woman who'd discovered that sometimes the best choices were the ones you made in desperation, if you were brave enough to transform them into something real. Ronan squeezed her hand as they reached the manor steps. What are you thinking about? That I'm glad Harold Locksley destroyed my reputation in London. He laughed, surprised. Really? Really? Arabella smiled up at him. Because it led me here, to you, to this. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. Even if it means endless council meetings and treaty negotiations. Especially then, she pulled him inside. Now stop being sentimental and open that French wine. I want to celebrate. Your wish, Ronan said, is my command. Partnership, Arabella corrected. Your wish gets equal consideration. Then I wish, he said softly, for exactly this, exactly you, exactly us, for as long as we both shall live. Granted, Arabella whispered, forever granted. And in the warm manor kitchen, with wine poured and dinner waiting, and the future stretching before them, uncertain and challenging and utterly worthwhile, they toasted to partnership, to choice, to the treaty they'd rebuilt together, and to the love that had grown from transaction into something neither of them could live without.